Stars fell like rain that night. It was not the soft drift of snow or the gentle scatter of ash from an old fire, but a cascade of light, fierce, living, and terrible in its beauty. The villagers of Hjaldarvik stood along the dark edge of the fjord, their torches trembling in their hands as the heavens split apart above them. What began as a shimmer became a wound, a red-gold fissure bleeding across the night. From it poured threads of fire, so thin they looked like strands of hair torn from a god's head. Liv was the first to step closer to the water. She was small and barefoot, her breath rising like smoke, her eyes fixed on the rippling reflection of the burning sky. "It's crying," she whispered, though no one answered. The old men muttered prayers Aegir, god of the deep, and the women pressed amulets of polished bone against their lips. The air smelled of salt and iron, and in that strange wind came a hum, low, trembling, as if the world itself had begun to vibrate. Across the fjord, mountains loomed like sleeping beasts, their snowy backs flickering with the same light that tore through the heavens. The goats bleated wildly, birds burst from the cliffs, and dogs howled until their voices broke. Then, with a sound like stone cracking in winter frost, the tear widened. A wave of silence followed, so complete that even the water seemed to forget how to move. Liv felt it, the pause in everything. The stars above her blinked uncertain, as though unsure whether to keep burning. The villagers knelt, expecting thunder, but instead came a whisper, soft and clear as glass breaking in slow motion. It wasn't a word they knew. It wasn't any word at all. Yet it reached them, through their bones, through the earth, through the quiet beat of every frightened heart. Some said, later, it was the voice of the sky calling for help. Others said it was a promise. Then came the light. It poured through the rift like blood, painting the fjord in molten gold. The reflection spread outward, turning the dark water into a mirror of some other world. For an instant, everyone saw themselves, not as they were, but as something vast and unbound. Liv saw herself standing on a plain of ice that stretched forever, her hands glowing like twin suns. Her mother screamed and pulled her back, but Liv barely heard. The sound around her had shifted again. It was music now, sorrowful, immense, and ancient enough to have no beginning. When the light faded, the rift began to close. But not completely. At its center hung a drop, a single sphere of gold suspended in the air, trembling as though unsure whether to fall. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. The villagers held their breath. Then, without warning, it fell, striking the surface of the fjord with no sound at all. The water rippled once and went still. By dawn, the tear was gone. The sky had mended itself, pale and innocent, as if the night before had been a fevered dream. Yet the air carried a taste no one could describe, sweet and cold, like light trapped in frost. The old seer, Astrid, declared that something had entered their world through that wound, something that would not leave easily. She warned that the first tear of the sky was only the beginning, and that it had fallen not upon them, but for them. Liv could not sleep that morning. Her mind replayed the hum, the way it had seemed to rise from inside her chest rather than from the heavens. She walked alone down to the water's edge. The fjord was calm, but when she looked down, her reflection didn't match her movement. It smiled when she didn't. Its eyes glowed faintly red, like embers beneath ash. Startled, she stepped back, and the reflection blinked not in fear, but in recognition. That day, the village changed. The fish avoided the nets. Gulls circled endlessly without landing, and the priest of Odin claimed he heard whispers in the church bell before it rang. Some villagers fled inland, fearing a curse. Others built fires along the shore, hoping to ward off whatever had come through. But Liv stayed. Something inside her refused to leave, as if a thread from that sky tear had wrapped itself around her heart and begun to pull. At twilight, she returned again to the fjord. The wind had fallen completely still. Not even the reeds swayed. She sat on a rock and listened, and after a long time, she heard it again, the hum, faint but clear, beneath the surface of the water. She leaned closer, her reflection rippling. The sound grew louder, layered with voices, thousands of them, each one speaking a language older than words. They did not frighten her. They made her weep without knowing why. The water rose suddenly, not as a wave, but as a column, a smooth pillar of liquid light. Within it, Shapes moved, wings, hands, eyes. The villagers, watching from afar, screamed that the sea was alive. But Liv stood still. She reached out her hand, and the light reached back. When her fingers touched it, warmth surged through her body, like fire that did not burn. In that moment she knew, though she could not have explained how, that the sky had not cried from pain, but from memory. The gods, she understood, were forgetting. The worlds that once mirrored each other were drifting apart. The tear had been a reminder, a single wound to which remembrance leaked. And now, that remembrance had chosen her. The light receded slowly, collapsing into itself until all that remained was a single drop balanced on her fingertip. She lifted it to her eyes. Inside it swirled the entire night sky, tiny and infinite. When it finally sank into her skin, the fjord fell silent again. Liv walked home barefoot, the cold stones pressing against her feet, her breath forming clouds that glittered faintly even in the dark. Behind her, the fjord shimmered once, just once, before returning to black. She felt the hum still within her, a soft echo pulsing behind her ribs, and knew the tear had never truly closed. The sky might heal, but what had fallen would remain awake, waiting for the day it was called by name again. And somewhere, high above, where no eye could reach, the stars began to rearrange themselves, tracing new constellations none of the gods remembered, and spelling out a shape that looked almost human. By day, Liv worked along the harbor, her hands moving in rhythm with the tide. She sat on a low stool beside the mast, surrounded by coils of rope and folded sails that smelled of brine and salt and the breath of faraway storms. The gulls called above her head, and each needle stroke seemed to echo their cry, sharp, high, endless. To the sailors, she was simply the girl with the quiet hands, the one who could mend any tear, no matter how wild the sea had been. But there was something else in her stitches, something no one could name, a stillness that did not belong to this world. She had begun hearing it weeks after the night the sky tore open. The strange hum that had slipped into her blood that evening now spoke to the fabric she touched. At first it was faint, like wind caught in canvas, or the soft rubbing of thread between fingers. But soon it became a voice, low and tired, like an old sea begging for rest. Liv would pause mid-stitch, her needle suspended in the air, certain someone had whispered her name. When she looked around, the docks were empty, the sea unbroken. Only the sails breathed. At night, the sound grew stronger. The room where she slept above the sail loft filled with the murmur of cloths brushing against one another. The curtains trembled without wind. The blankets shifted as though remembering waves. Lying awake, Liv pressed her ear to the sheets and heard what no one else could. Fabric whispering, long, drawn-out sighs threaded with words. Sew me, mend me, close the wound. She thought at first it was the sea's voice echoing in her mind, or perhaps the memory of the sky's terror had driven her half mad. But the whispers persisted, gathering into patterns that pulsed through her dreams. Each night she woke with new stitches mapped across her thoughts, like constellations sewn into her sleep. The villagers began to notice her distraction. She'd stared too long at torn sails, listening instead of mending. When she did finally sew, her work was even finer than before, but the seams shimmered faintly, as if light had been trapped inside the thread. One fisherman refused to use his sail, claiming it hummed when the wind passed through. Another swore he'd heard his dead brother's voice whispering from it, warning of storms. They whispered about Liv now, too, that she had been marked the night the sky bled. Liv didn't deny it. She couldn't. The voices were not frightening anymore. They were pleading. Sometimes they came from the sails stacked around her, other times from the earth itself, the ground beneath her bare feet murmuring of cracks unseen. The hills to the north, she was certain, were unraveling. The world, somehow, was coming apart at its seams, and she was the only one who could hear it. One night, when thunder rolled over the fjord, she climbed to the roof with her needle and thread. The storm was enormous, its belly swollen with light. Each flash illuminated the waves like torn sheets of silver. Liv spread her arms and whispered back to the sky, her words almost lost in the wind. "I hear you," she said, "but where do I begin?" Lightning struck the water, and in that moment the threads in her hand glowed red. Not from fire, but from recognition. The thunder that followed wasn't just sound. It was a heartbeat, deep and rhythmic, echoing through her chest. The wind pulled her hair across her face, and she felt the same pulse within the air, within the world. She began to sew. She stitched through emptiness, through the rain, through the invisible rifts the storm revealed. Each movement of her needle drew thin lines of light, weaving the air back together. Where the thread passed, the rain slowed, and the clouds seemed to sigh in relief. Her hands worked faster, the thread tightening across the horizon like veins carrying new blood. But as she sewed, she felt resistance, as though the world itself fought against healing. The air grew heavy. The lightning flickered violently, warning her that some wounds were meant to stay open. Still, she refused to stop. She sewed until her fingers bled, the red mixing with the gold light of the storm. The wind screamed now, voices overlapping, a chorus of pain and memory. "You can't mend what was never broken," one voice hissed. "You can only remember what was whole." But she kept stitching, the needle flashing like a shard of the fallen stars. When the storm finally broke, she fell to her knees, the thread vanishing into the wet earth. The sea calmed, the air cleared, and dawn arrived in silence. The villagers found her there, her hands trembling, the roof around her marked with faint golden lines that refused to wash away. They asked what she had done, and Liv could only whisper, "I tried to sew the world shut." After that night, the thunder changed. Whenever storms gathered above Hjaldarvik, the first peal of thunder carried a tone like a voice calling her name. Some said it was the gods thanking her. Others said it was warning her never to interfere again. But Liv knew the truth lay somewhere between. She still repaired sails, though the men now left them at her door instead of bringing them in. She worked quietly, humming the same rhythm the thunder had taught her. Sometimes, when her needle pierced the fabric, tiny sparks of light escaped. She'd pause, smile faintly, and whisper to the air, "It's all right. I'm still listening." At night, the whisper softened. The fabric still spoke, but with less urgency, as though the world, knowing she could hear, no longer needed a shout. And sometimes, in the deepest hours before dawn, she'd wake to find her thread glowing faintly, stretched across her room in impossible patterns, tying together shadow and starlight, keeping them from drifting too far apart. Liv never spoke of it again. But whenever thunder rolled across the fjord, she looked up and smiled, because she could hear, beneath the fury and the rain, a whisper of gratitude. The world no longer begged to be sewn shut. It simply asked her to keep holding the thread. Kjell's forge at the far edge of Hjaldarvik, where the cliffs met the Black Sea and the gulls dared not cry. The air there always carried the scent of iron and storms, a mix that made the lungs ache and the heart remember. The villagers said his hammer never missed, though his eyes were dim and his hands shook like leaves in frost. He was a man made of echoes, more memory than flesh, and the fire seemed to know it. When he struck, the sparks didn't scatter. They rose and hovered for a heartbeat, like spirits deciding whether to stay. By day, he forged what others requested: blades for sailors, hinges for boats, nails for roofs that leaked through the long winters. But his true work began when the sun sank behind the fjord and the forge turned red as blood. Then, Kjell shaped metal no one had asked for. The anvil rang in a rhythm that didn't belong to any human song. His hammer swung not for war, not for craft, but for confession. Every blade he made at night carried a voice. Some hummed low and mournful, like widows praying. Others keened high, vibrating with old fury. The villagers who found such weapons buried them at once, fearing their whispers would call back the dead. Yet still, Kjell kept forging. He could not stop. The sound of metal becoming more than itself was the only thing that reminded him he still existed. He had once been a warrior, before the long wars turned to smoke and the gods stopped answering. He remembered battlefields like fevered dreams, the crush of shield against bone, the red fog that blurred friend and foe. He remembered the day he should have died, the spear that should have ended him. But it hadn't. The wound had burned, then sealed without blood. When he awoke days later, he found himself among the corpses, breathing in a silence that didn't belong to the living. The ravens perched around him and did not eat. One of them, golden-eyed, unblinking, spoke without sound. "You've been forgotten." From that day forward, he did not age. His hair grayed, yes, and his joints ached, but the deeper decay, The fading of breath into rest never came. He lived on while those around him withered and were buried. He lit their funeral pyres himself, forging nails to their coffins, feeling the weight of every life he had outlasted. He called it punishment at first, then a mistake, and finally, a habit. Lately, his dreams had begun to change. Instead of fields of battle, he saw a great loom, not of wool or flax, but of chains. The links were blackened, each one etched with runes he couldn't read, and they moved as though alive. A faceless figure worked the loom, weaving the chains into a pattern that never repeated. Sometimes Kjell thought it was himself he saw there, hammering not to forge but to bind. When he awoke from such dreams, his forge felt colder. The metal refused to heat evenly, and the fire hissed, as if resenting its own birth. The next morning after such nights, he would find shapes in the soot, faces half-formed, mouths open mid-prayer. He'd sweep them away and say nothing, but the faces always returned. One evening, a storm rolled in from the sea, a furious, howling thing that rattled the earth. The wind tore through the thatch and set the waves a-clawing at the cliffs. Kjell worked through it, bare-armed, the rain hissing against his forge. The thunder shook his tools, and every strike of his hammer answered it. Between those echoes, he heard something else. Stop forging what you will not wield. He froze. The voice had come from nowhere or everywhere. It was not a threat, but a command, heavy with exhaustion. He looked at the blade on the anvil, glowing like molten sorrow, and for the first time he felt it pulse, once, twice, as though breathing. "Then what am I to make?" he whispered. The thunder answered with silence. When the storm passed, he quenched the blade in sea water instead of oil. The water boiled, turning black. When he lifted the sword, it sang, not with beauty, but with grief so pure it nearly broke him. He set it aside, trembling. The song lingered in the air long after the fire had died. Days later, Liv came to him, carrying a torn sail she wanted mended with iron rings. The two had spoken little before, though each had seen in the other the same haunted light, the knowing of something beyond the edges of speech. Kjell watched her lay the fabric across his table. When her hand brushed the metal, the threads inside the cloth shimmered faintly. His forge crackled, unbidden. "You hear it too," he said softly. Liv looked up. "Hear what?" The world asking to be mended. For a long moment neither moved. The air between them throbbed, alive with some invisible current. Then Liv nodded, as if the words had unlocked something already waiting in her. Together, they began to work, his hammer striking, her fingers guiding the thread through the loops. Where metal met cloth, light bloomed. It wasn't bright, but deep like the glow inside amber. That night, Kjell dreamed again of the chain loom. But now, someone stood beside the faceless weaver. Liv, her hair made of threads that shimmered like stormlight. She held a needle of iron, and with every motion, the chain softened into fabric. The faceless weaver spoke, though his mouth was only shadow. "Every unbroken soul is a link. You forge them. She mend them." When he awoke, the forge was already warm, though no fire burned in it. His tools glowed faintly, and the blade he quenched in the sea lay across the anvil, cool and silent at last. He felt, for the first time in centuries, something close to weariness, not the ache of age, but the permission to rest. He stepped outside. The dawn was pale and trembling. The world smelled clean, as if washed by unseen hands. Liv stood by the water, sewing something invisible into the air, her fingers tracing unseen patterns. Kjell watched her, then turned toward the sea and whispered, "If forgetting was my curse, perhaps remembering is my death." A low roll of thunder answered, far off but kind. He smiled. When he went back inside, the forge fire lit itself one final time. The villager said later that the glow from his workshop that morning was brighter than any sunrise, and when they entered, the place was empty. Only the anvil remained warm, and across it lay a single thread of gold, stretched from one end to the other, as if someone had finally tied the world shut. Eir walked barefoot through the misted valleys of Midgard, her steps silent upon the frost-stiff moss. Once, her name had been spoken with reverence in the halls of Asgard. Eir, hand of mercy, chooser of the wounded, winged healer of the fallen. But now her wings were gone, burned away in a fire no god claimed to have started. Her eyes, one sharp as a hawk's, saw only a gray shimmer where form should be. Yet blindness had opened her to something deeper. Where others saw light and shadow, she heard the hum beneath all things, the trembling pulse that lived between breath and silence. It was that vibration that guided her north toward the sea. She could hear the mountains murmuring like sleeping beasts, could sense rivers whispering of the sky's first tear. Each sound carried a rhythm, a pattern she could almost touch. The dead, too, had joined that music. Their voices drifted to her through the fog, thin and forlorn, each note a plea left unanswered. She carried no weapon now, only a staff of driftwood polished smooth by ages of tide. Its surface throbbed faintly when the voices grew near. Sometimes they cried to her, soldiers unburied, mothers lost in childbirth, children whose names no one remembered. "We never rose," they whispered. The bridge was broken. The song stopped halfway. Air would kneel, touching the soil with her palms, feeling the way the vibration faltered where the living had forgotten prey. She wept for them silently, her tears falling into the cracks between worlds. The gods had turned their faces from Midgard. That much was clear. The skies that once glittered with passage now hung empty, indifferent. Air had wandered for centuries, seeking the reason the dead no longer found their way. In every field, every ruined temple, she felt the same trembling, not of life, but of something trying to hold itself together. It was as if the fabric of reality itself were fraying. Each soul lost a thread pulled loose. One evening, as the sun died behind the fjords, she reached Hjaldarvik. The air there was different, dense, resonant, humming with the echoes she had chased since the burning of her wings. The village slept uneasily, haunted by winds that did not move, but the earth beneath it sang. She followed that sound to a small forge at the edge of the cliffs. Inside, the scent of cooled iron filled her lungs. The fire was cold, but the anvil still throbbed with warmth. The residue of creation. She knelt beside it, touching her fingers to the metal, and felt the echo pulse back through her skin. This one remembered. The hum seemed to say, "He forged what was forgotten." She stayed there until dawn, listening to the remnants of Kjell's final heartbeat trapped in the tools. When the wind shifted, it carried another rhythm, softer and higher, the thread song of a woman by the sea. Liv's voice was not a voice at all, but the sound of something being repaired. Air turned her face toward it, her blind eyes flooding with light she couldn't see but could hear. It was the same vibration that had haunted her since she fell from the skies, the same plea the souls made when they called her name in dreams. She followed it through the sleeping village, her staff tapping softly against the stones. The path led her to the fjord. Liv stood there, hair tangled by the salt breeze, sewing light into the air with invisible thread. The water shimmered with each motion of her hand, as though obeying an ancient rhythm. Air stopped a few paces away. "You hear it too," she said. Liv turned, startled but calm. "The world's cry." Air smiled faintly. "No, its heartbeat." They faced each other in silence. The wind fell still, as if listening. Between them, something vast began to stir, not in the air, but in the space under the sound, where the hum of the world met the silence of what lay beyond. Air stepped closer. "It was never just a tear in the sky," she whispered. "It was the wound of memory. The bridge that carried the dead broke, when the gods forgot how to listen. You hear the same vibration because you are part of its mending." Liv's hands trembled. "And you?" "I was its guardian," Air said softly, "until I became its echo." She lifted her staff, and for the first time in centuries, she felt the weight of her lost wings, not behind her, but within her chest, each heartbeat a beat of flight. The sea exhaled, the air thickened with light, and the faint outlines of spirits began to rise from the water. Faces emerged, some familiar to Liv, others ancient and strange. They hovered in silence, drawn by the harmony that now resonated between the two women. Air raised her hand, palm open. They had been waiting for the seam to close. Liv reached forward. Her thread of gold leapt from her fingers, wrapping around Air's wrist like a living filament. Together they began to weave, not fabric, not metal, but memory. Every motion drew the lost souls nearer, their forms flickering with recognition. The hum deepened, rolling to the mountains, down into the earth's core, through roots and stone and every sleeping vein of metal. When the final thread was tied, the air trembled once more, not in pain this time, but in relief. The spirits bowed their heads, then rose in a quiet column of light that drifted upward into the pale morning sky. For the first time in ages, the sound of wings returned to Midgard, faint but sure. Air stood trembling, her sightless eyes gleaming with tears. "The bridge remembers," she said, "but it needs keepers." Liv nodded. "Then we will listen." The light faded slowly, leaving only the echo, the pulse of a world mended, though scarred. The fjord settled into stillness, and far above, the stars rearranged themselves once more, weaving a new constellation that looked like a scene being closed by an unseen hand. Air turned her face upward and smiled. "So be it," she whispered. "Let silence learn to sing again." And somewhere beyond the clouds, the gods, those who have forgotten their own creation, stirred in uneasy wonder, for the hum of the world had changed key. It now carried the sound of two mortal hearts stitching eternity back together. The morning was thin and blue, the kind of cold that made the world seem carved from glass. The fjord was calm, too calm, the surface so still it seemed to hold its breath. Liv walked along the shore with her needle kit tied at her waist, gathering bits of driftwood and sea thread for her repairs. The tide had receded farther than usual, bearing stones slick with salt and memory. She felt it before she saw it, a vibration in the air, soft but insistent, like the faint hum of a string pulled taut inside her chest. Then she saw it, a single strand of light caught among the seaweed. It looked like a thread of molten gold, no thicker than a hair, yet it pulsed with a rhythm alive and deliberate. The morning sun hadn't reached it yet, but it glowed on its own, slow, breathing light, as if it had a heart. Liv crouched down, her breath fogging the air. The closer she came, the louder the hum grew. It wasn't sound, exactly. It was more like the feeling of thunder before it speaks. Every instinct told her not to touch it, that some things from the sea returned only to test the living. But curiosity, that old ache that had guided her since the night the sky tore open, pushed her forward. She reached out and brushed it with the tips of her fingers. A flash, not of heat, but of cold so pure it burned. Frost leapt across her skin in a lace of white veins, racing up her wrist before she could pull away. Her breath caught. The pain was immediate, but it wasn't cruel. It was alive. The thread clung to her palm, quivering, as if unwilling to let go. And beneath the sting, she felt something else, a heartbeat, not her own. She staggered back, clutching her hand to her chest. The frost didn't fade. It shimmered, tiny runes flickering beneath the surface, shifting like sparks beneath ice. When she blinked, the runes changed, forming patterns she almost understood, fragments of a language older than the wind. One symbol pulsed brighter than the rest, shaped like a loop tightening upon itself. The hum deepened, resonating with the air, the stones, even the pulse of her blood. Then came the voices, faint, overlapping, a chorus of whispers woven from memory. You pulled the world closed. But every stitch demands a spark. Liv fell to her knees. The strand still lay across her palm, neither hot nor cold now, but waiting. She understood, somehow, that it wasn't a thread of gold, nor even light. It was fire slowed down, a filament of something divine that had fallen from the first tear in the sky, drifted through oceans and chosen her. She closed her fingers around it. The frost flared once more, and she saw, not with her eyes, but through her pulse, flashes of a forge. Kjell's hammer striking, air's blind gaze turned toward the sea, wings of sound spreading through shadow. The images came too fast, too bright, each leaving a burn that wasn't pain but remembrance. When she opened her hand, the thread had embedded itself in her palm. A faint glow traced the lines of her skin like a living scar. She could feel it now, coiled beneath the flesh, humming in rhythm with the world. Every sound, the waves, the wind, even her heartbeat, aligned with it, as though the universe had tuned itself to her frequency. She rose slowly. The frost had melted from the rocks, the air warmer than it should have been. Around her, small crystals of ice hover for a moment before evaporating into mist. Liv turned toward the horizon, where the sea met the pale sun, and for the first time she saw something stirring beneath the surface. Not movement, but light, rippling like fire seen through water. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't need to turn to know it was Air. The blind Valkyrie walked with her staff, like one who could see farther than sight allowed. "You found it," Air said. Liv looked at her hand, still trembling with glow. "What is it?" "The first filament of the weave," Air whispered. "What the gods lost when they ceased to sing." She tilted her head, as if listening to the silence between waves. The bridge held, but barely. The world remembers the wound. Now it needs a flame to heal the scar. Liv swallowed. "And this is that flame?" Air smiled faintly. "It's not a flame. It's what came before fire learned to burn." The word sent a shiver down Liv's spine. The thread pulsed once more, sinking with a faint beat in the air, the same vibration they both heard deep within the bones of the earth. The hum was growing louder, spreading beyond the fjord now, echoing through cliffs, forests, and frozen rivers. Air's expression turned solemn. It's calling others. The forgotten, the unmade, the pieces of creation that still remember the song. Liv closed her fist, feeling the hum settle under her skin. "Then I'll find them." Air nodded. "Be careful. Threads of fire remember what they touch. And not all memories should wake." That night, Liv dreamed of the world beneath the ice, not frozen, but woven. Rivers of light snaked through the dark, and every thread burned with frost fire, connecting everything that had ever lived. In the center of it all was a loom, vast and endless, its frame made of constellations. A faceless weaver stood before it, pulling strands of flame into patterns too intricate to name. When the weaver turned, Liv saw her own reflection staring back. Eyes glowed with the same cold fire that marked her palm. She woke before dawn, her room still pulsing faintly, as if the walls had learned to breathe. The air smelled faintly of iron and snow. Outside, the sea whispered against the stones, not in words but in rhythm. The hum was everywhere now, alive and vast, the sound of something ancient stirring beneath the skin of the world. And as Liv stepped out into the cold, she understood that the thread she carried was not just a gift. It was a memory made physical, a spark of the first song trying to begin again. The path into the mountain began behind the old forge, half buried beneath ivy and years of wind-blown ash. Liv and Air found it at dawn, when the first light fell thinly across the cliffs and caught a faint shimmer, the same gold that burned now beneath Liv's skin. The entrance was narrow, the rock damp and breathing. A cold draft rose from below, carrying the scent of metal left to dream too long. They descended in silence, their steps echoing down the spiral of stone. Air's staff tapped in rhythm, following the pulse that both of them could feel, a deep vibration underfoot, like the heartbeat of the world trying to steady itself. The air grew warmer as they went, tinged with something electrical, the ghost of a forge that had never truly cooled. "The dwarves once lived here," Air murmured. Her voice carried easily in the dark. "They built the gears that helped the Norns spin fate. The gods called it servitude. The dwarves called it music." Liv brushed her fingers along the wall. The rock was etched with long-forgotten runes, their edges worn smooth, but faint light moved inside them like the last embers of dying stars. "What happened to them?" Air tilted her head, as if listening to something in the silence. "They learned too much about endings." The tunnel widened into a vast cavern. The ceiling arched so high that their torches couldn't find it, and yet the space was not empty. Threads of faint blue light drifted in the air, twisting and fading, illuminating vast shapes of machinery built into the rock. Enormous gears half buried in stone turned so slowly they might have been mistaken for stillness. And in the center, upon a dais of black iron, stood what was left of the loom. It had once been grand, a structure of gold and obsidian, spanning the width of the cavern, but now it lay in ruin. Beams hung broken, threads torn and tangled, the frame split as if struck by lightning from inside. Yet from its core came a sound, not grinding, but singing, a soft metallic lullaby, as if the machine remembered a pattern it once wove and was trying, feebly, to repeat it. Liv stepped forward, her eyes reflecting the blue light. "It's alive," she whispered. Air nodded slowly. Everything that remembers how to sing is alive. They approached the dais. The air around it trembled, warping the torchlight. Liv felt the thread beneath her skin throb in answer, heat blooming through her palm. When she lifted her hand, the glowing mark flickered brighter, and the loom's gears shifted, creaking as though awakening from centuries of sleep. "Careful," Air warned. "It knows you." Liv hesitated. "Knows me?" "You closed the sky," Air said softly. "You mended what was never meant to heal. The loom feels your touch as a wound feels a needle." The gears began to turn faster now, shaking the floor. Dust fell like ash. From somewhere deep within the structure came a long, low note, the sound of a string pulled too tight, straining toward remembrance. Liv reached out anyway. Her fingers brushed a filament stretched across the broken frame. It glowed instantly, flaring with gold and red. Firelight and bloodlight mingled. The cavern filled with sound. The gears whirled, the air trembled, and light poured from the fractures in the walls. Liv stumbled back, blinded, and saw not the mountain, but flashes of something beyond it. Rivers flowing backward, stars unraveling, and the roots of the world tree trembling as though afraid. Air slammed her staff against the ground, the wood ringing like struck bronze. "Enough!" The light dimmed, the machinery groaned, and the song faltered to a whisper. Liv fell to her knees, her breath ragged. The golden thread in her palm pulsed weakly, flickering like a dying ember. Air knelt beside her. "It remembers everything it ever wove," she said. "Every birth, every death, every choice. But it cannot tell the difference between mending and destroying." Liv looked up at the shattered loom. "Then why bring us here?" "Because the Norns are gone," Air said, "and fate is fraying faster than it can forget." She placed her hand on Liv's shoulder, guiding her gaze toward the gears. "Listen, beneath the noise." Liv closed her eyes. Beneath the groaning metal and the whispered dying light, she heard it, faint, pure, and steady. A single tone, the same hum that had haunted her since the night the skies split. It pulsed in perfect time with her heartbeat. "The same vibration," she murmured. "The same song." "Yes," Air said. "The loom sings to the thread within you. The world wants to remember what it was before the gods shaped it, before fate was divided into past and future." Liv's voice trembled. "What happens if it remembers?" Air smiled sadly. "Then the pattern will begin again. But not all who lived once will belong to it." The machinery groaned once more, then fell still. The cavern dimmed, leaving only the faint shimmer of threads swaying in the air. They hung loose, severed at the ends, glowing with the softest light, the same hue as dawn seen through tears. Liv reached for one. It pulsed at her touch, humming the way a string hums after being plucked. "It wants to be rewoven," she said. Air nodded. "And it will, but it must choose its weaver wisely." They stood in silence, listening to the dying song of the gears. It wasn't sorrowful. It was weary. The sound of a god too old to pray, of a machine waiting for its maker to return. When they finally turned to leave, the air behind them rippled. The loom shifted slightly, aligning its broken frame toward the tunnel's mouth, as if watching them go. The song that followed them up the passage was quiet but persistent, threading itself through stone and air alike. By the time they emerged into daylight, the hum had reached the sky. The clouds above Hjaldarvik trembled, faint veins of gold flickering through their gray bellies. Liv's hand still burned faintly, and she could feel, deep beneath her feet, the loom's heartbeat continuing, slow, patient, eternal. Air looked toward the horizon. "The mountain remembers its song now," she said, "and the gods will feel it." Liv turned her face toward the wind, feeling the pulse in her palm answer the rhythm below. "Then the world is listening again." Air smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, "and when the world listens, something always awakens." Far below them, in the dark belly of the mountain, one of the gears turned once more, not with strain, but with purpose, and from a broken loom came a single, fragile note, ringing out like the first thread of a new beginning. The wind that rolled down from the mountains carried a different tone that morning, an undercurrent of speech without words, like a story trying to retell itself through the air. Liv and Air stood outside the mouth of the cavern, the memory of the shattered loom still echoing behind their ribs. The hum of the world had changed again, quieter, almost shy, but pulsing with intelligence. They had begun to descend the western slope, when Liv stopped mid-step. The frostlight beneath her skin flared, searing and cold. A voice entered her like breath, not spoken, not thought, woven directly through her nerves. "Do not seek us." She gasped, the sound mist in the air. Air turned, her unseeing eyes narrowing. "What did you hear?" Liv swallowed. "A warning. From the loom song." Air lifted her staff. "No, not the loom. Them." The valley below seemed to tighten in silence. Every tree, every stone, every thread of wind was listening. Then, out of the stillness, came movement. 3 figures stepping out of the shimmer of air itself, like reflections detaching from water. They were not ghosts, nor entirely flesh. They were made of thread and shadow, their forms shifting with the rhythm of speech. Each held in her hand a strand of light, one red, one silver, one black. Liv knew them before Air spoke their names. Verandi, Skuld, the Norns. Air fell to one knee, though she had sworn never again to bow to God or fate. "We thought you gone," she said. The first of them, the one holding the red strand, spoke. Her voice rippled through the air like ink in water. "Gone? We are what remains when being ceases. We did not die." Liv stepped closer, her heart pounding. "The loom below it shattered. I thought it was your death." The silver-handed one, Verandi, smiled faintly. "It was our unmaking, not our end. We unraveled ourselves before the final prophecy could bind us." Air lifted her face. "You mean Ragnarok?" The black-threaded Norn shook her head. "No, something older. The prophecy written before Ragnarok, one the gods never learned to read. It told of the death not of gods, but pattern itself." Liv felt her pulse falter. "You destroyed your own loom to stop it?" Or nodded slowly. "To delay it." The pattern began to see itself. Fate became aware of the hands that shaped it. We wove the world too tightly, and the threads began to strangle the song. To end the cycle, we had to become undone. Each strand released, each memory scattered. Air whispered, "And now?" Verandi's eyes turned toward Liv, though they had no pupils. Now the scattered threads remember each other. Liv looked down at her palm. The golden filament burned brighter, alive with the same pulse that vibrated through the air. "This is one of you?" Skuld, the black-threaded one, nodded. "The last spark of what we were. We hid ourselves within the weave, one in fire, one in flesh, one in silence. You carry the fire. Her gaze shifted to Air, carries the silence. Together, you awaken the third." "The loom," Liv whispered. "No," said "the choice." The air trembled as their voices merged, forming a single tone that wrapped around the 2 women like a ribbon tightening. The world no longer obeys the written. It listens to the living. But the old prophecy still stirs in the roots. The gods remember its shadow, though not its words. You must decide whether to reweave or to let it fade. Liv took a breath. "If I mend the threads, what happens?" The Norns' forms flickered, their outlines unraveling and reforming. "If you mend them, the pattern will return, perfect, eternal, and unchanging. But perfection is the death of song. And if I let them fade, then the world will forget its purpose and begin again. But every beginning demands a forgetting." Air reached for Liv's arm, her touch grounding. "There's no right path," she murmured. "Only rhythm." The 3 Norns stepped closer. The red, silver, and black strands extended from their hands, brushing against Liv's chest, her palm, her temple. "You were not chosen," they said. "You were remembered." Then, as gently as mist dispersing, they began to unravel once more, each dissolving into fine motes of light that floated upward like fireflies caught in wind. The threads they left behind coiled in the air, twisting together, merging with the glow inside Liv's hand, until all that remained was one faint hum. The mountain fell silent. Liv stood very still. "They didn't die," she whispered. "They became the fabric itself." Air smiled faintly, and now the fabric breathes. Above them, the clouds parted. The sky shimmered with long strands of color, red, silver, black, spanning the heavens like the threads of a new loom being drawn across the firmament. The hum beneath the world shifted tone again, soft but resolute, and somewhere in its depths Liv thought she heard laughter, ancient, weary, relieved. Air lifted her staff toward the sky. The Norns unraveled fate, to save it from itself. Now the world belongs to those who can hear the whisper. Liv closed her eyes, feeling the vibration pulse through her veins, through the mountains, through the still sea below. It wasn't a command. It wasn't prophecy. It was possibility. And for the first time since the sky's first tear, the song did not sound like mourning. It sounded like freedom. The forge burned again, though no one had lit it. The mountain itself seemed to remember how. When Liv and Air returned to the cavern, they found the air trembling with heatless fire, light that bent but did not burn, sparks moving backward into the coals, as if time itself were being drawn in to relight the hearth. And Kjell was there. He stood before the anvil like a statue thawed from ore, eyes bright with exhaustion that had learned how to endure. His hands were clean of soot. His hammer glowed faintly, as if forged in the same light that flickered between the stars. "You came late," he said without looking up. His voice was deep, the sound of old iron remembering its name. But not too late. Liv took a hesitant step forward. "You were gone." "I was never gone," Kjell said, "just misplaced." He lifted the hammer and set a length of metal upon the anvil, a sliver so thin it was nearly invisible, except for the starlight that ran through its core. The loom below waits for its mender, and no tool of earth can touch what was once divine. So I gathered the remnants. Air's blind eyes gleamed. "Remnants of what?" "The fallen stars," Kjell murmured. "Every spark that broke away from the first tear in the sky. They remember being whole. I only reminded them how to sing together." He struck once. The sound rang like a chime across the entire cavern. The air bent. The old gears shivered, and the shattered loom turned its face toward the forge as if listening. The glow from the metal deepened into a white, so pure it carried a shadow of blue. With careful precision, Kjell lifted the piece with tongs and placed it upon black velvet. It wasn't a blade. It wasn't even a nail. It was a needle, long, delicate, unearthly. The point shimmered with potential, sharp enough to pierce not flesh but the distance between what was and what could be. Liv could barely breathe. A needle of starlight. Kjell nodded once. For the world's last seam. He turned to Air and knelt. But no tool, however perfect, can stitch the wound without an oath. Every mender must pay a price. The thread remembers. The metal remembers. The hand must remember too. Air touched the needle with trembling fingers. The light rippled across her palms and into her eyes. For a moment, sight returned to her, a blaze of color so bright she gasped. But instead of seeing the present, she saw everything. Every life she had ever touched, every soul she had guided, every death she had witnessed. The vision was too vast, too merciful. She wept as the light faded. Then she smiled. "It is pure," she whispered. "It has no will but the will to mend." She held it to her lips, and her breath, once a healer's prayer, now an invocation, settled into the metal. "Then I bless it with blindness," she said. "Let it see only the truth of touch. Let it pierce what was hidden, not what was seen." The air shifted. The needle pulsed once, as if acknowledging the vow. Kjell handed it to Liv. "Every stitch you make will close a wound," he said, "but it will cost a memory. That is the oath of the broken tools." Liv's hands trembled as she took it. The metal was warm, as if alive, the hum of it syncing with the rhythm of her own blood. A memory? The loom cannot be rewoven without offering something that once bound it. Air said gently, "Each stitch draws strength from what you have lived. Each closure asks, what will you forget to make the world remember?" Liv looked from one to the other. "If I lose myself..." Kjell shook his head. "You will not lose yourself. You will become what remains after everything unnecessary has been forgotten. The forge roared, flames bowing inward like reverent worshippers. The walls of the cavern glowed with faint constellations, the same runes the dwarves had carved centuries before. Liv raised a needle, and the air parted around it like cloth ready to be sewn. Air placed her hand upon Liv's heart. The first stitch must be made freely. Once it is done, the world will choose what memory to take. Do not resist it. Let it unravel what it must. Liv closed her eyes. She could hear the broken loom begin to hum again, threads shivering like wind through tall grass. The golden mark on her palm glowed, aligning perfectly with the needle's light. Slowly, she guided it toward the nearest torn strand, one that fluttered at the edge of the dais, half forgotten, shimmering with the faces of countless souls. The needle met the thread. The instant the point touched it, the world stopped breathing. A silence vast and sacred filled everything. The light burst outward, wrapping the chamber in gold and blue, swallowing every shadow. Then came the memory. She saw her mother's face by the fire, hands teaching her to mend sails, humming a lullaby older than words. The smell of salt, the warmth of wool, the steady rhythm of love unspoken. And then, gone. The memory folded inward, not destroyed, but returned to the song from which it had once been borrowed. When Liv opened her eyes, tears streamed down her cheeks. The first stitch glowed faintly upon the loom, perfect, eternal. But her mother's name hovered at the edge of thought, unreachable, like a word half heard in a dream. Air knelt beside her. It has begun. Kjell rested a hand upon the anvil, and the world breathes again. Above them, the mountainside. The hum spread outward, through stone, through sea, through sky, carried with the sound of the first stitch in the fabric of creation. It was not sorrowful, nor triumphant. It was balance, the music of loss transforming into renewal. The forge dimmed, the needle cooled, the world waited for the next memory. The river revealed itself only at dusk, when the air between one heartbeat and the next grew thin enough for time to forget its direction. From the mouth of the fjord, Liv and Air watched as the waters twisted and rose in defiance of gravity, bending back upon themselves like a serpent tasting its own past. The current ran not seaward, but inward, toward the mountains, toward the hidden spring where all beginnings were kept. It did not roar or rush. It remembered. The sound it made was unlike any water born of earth. It moved in sighs and reverse whispers, carrying echoes instead of waves. Each ripple glittered with fragments of what had been, images folding over themselves like pages being unturned, ships reassembling from wrecks, blossoms retreating into buds, snow melting upward into clouds. Air dipped her fingers into the shallows. The touch sent a tremor up her arm. "It runs through the loom's oldest threads," she said. "This is not a river of the world. It is a seam between memory and unmaking." Liv stepped closer, the starlit needle bound at her wrist by a thread of frostlight. "Then this is where we cross." Kjell, silent since the forge, nodded. His eyes glinted like metal in moonlight. "Every craftsman must test his work," he murmured, "even if the test consumes the hand that made it." They found a boat waiting at the edge of the strange current, a vessel carved from dark wood, its hull veined with veins of silver that pulsed faintly like arteries. No one had built it. It had simply been waiting, the way certain truths wait for language. When Liv placed her palm upon it, the boat shivered as though recognizing the pulse of its passenger. The three boarded in silence. The river accepted them with the indifference of something older than destiny. As the boat drifted upstream, against logic, against time, the world around them began to reverse. The stars wheeled backward, retracing constellations that had not existed for millennia. The moon thinned, then swelled again, cycling in moments through its phases. Even their reflections in the water grew younger, softer, less sure of themselves. Kjell watched his hands as the scars faded from his knuckles. "We are being unwoven," he said. Air, her blind eyes open to things beyond sight, whispered, "No, we are being remembered in the order the gods first dreamed us." The current thickened, shimmering with streaks of gold like veins of sunlight trapped beneath ice. The deeper they went, the more the air filled with sound, not the hum they had come to know, but its mirror, an echo turned inside out. The song of the world played backward, and within it Liv could hear moments collapsing. The cry of the sky when it first tore, the sigh of the first soul that forgot to die, the laughter of a forge finding its purpose. Then the river began to rise. It climbed the mountain's belly like a serpent of glass, carrying them through tunnels lined with luminous moss that pulsed to their heartbeats. The walls were carved with runes moving in reverse, prophecies unwriting themselves, wars being forgiven before they began. Liv gripped the edge of the boat, the thread of firelight in her palm glowing brighter than ever. If it flows backward, she said, does that mean we're going back to where the world was made? Air nodded slowly, to its spring, to the first pattern. But beware, what is pure at the beginning is also blind. Creation does not know mercy. It only knows repetition. Kjell's voice rumbled low. Then we must remind it of mercy. The boat curved around a bend that seemed to fold reality upon itself. Ahead, the water glowed white, so bright it cast shadows in every direction. At the center of the radiance, a whirlpool turned not downward, but up, spiraling toward the ceiling of the cavern beyond, as though it were wound trying to close. The source, air-breathed, the spring that remembers the first loom. As they neared it, the current fought them, not violently, but sorrowfully, like a parent reluctant to let go of a child. The hum of the needle grew sharp in Liv's ears, and the memory it demanded came unbidden. The night the sky had torn, her voice whispering, its crying, and the sound of her mother's laughter in the distance before the world remembered silence. She realized then that each stitch she made had been leading her here, not to mend the world, but to unmake the distance between its beginnings and its endings. The water grew shallow beneath them. Time itself grew heavy, draping the air in slow motion. They could see, beneath the transparent current, the reflection of what lay on the other side, the loom reborn, unbroken, spinning a pattern that shimmered with infinite possibilities. But it was not yet reachable. Between them and that vision flowed the barrier of unremembered time. Liv turned to air. If we cross, we'll forget everything. The gods, the tears, the song. Air smiled gently. Perhaps that is the price every world must pay to stay alive. Forgetting is the mother of wonder. Kjell placed his hand upon hers, steady as the anvil he once struck. Then let us be wonder's tools. Liv lifted the starlit needle. Its light arced across the river like a thread, seeking its own beginning. When the point touched the current, the water stilled. The whirlpool unraveled into a straight line of brilliance, a path leading directly into the spring. One last stitch, she whispered. Air placed her blind gaze upon the river. Then let it cost a memory of endings. Liv's hand trembled as she drove the needle forward. Light exploded around them, a seam drawn through water, through sound, to the fabric of time itself. The boat surged ahead, propelled not by current but by the will of what remembered itself. As they crossed, Liv felt everything, her name, her story, her grief, lift from her like dust in sunlight. But beneath the loss came something greater. The pulse of the first song, the raw music that had built the stars before they knew to burn. When the light dimmed, the river was gone. The boat rested on still water that reflected no sky, only endless brightness. The air tasted of newness. Air whispered, awestruck, "We have reached the other side of time." And from the spring before them rose a voice, neither male nor female, neither young nor old, made of every memory ever surrendered. It said gently, "Then stitch wisely, child of the tear. For each beginning is only the river remembering how to flow the right way again." The bridge revealed itself at twilight, that hour when even time seems to hold its breath before deciding what to become. It stretched across the abyss between the river's spring and a horizon of pale fire, a suspension of threads that glowed faintly red. As if they still remembered the pain that made them, Liv stepped closer, her heart beating in uneven rhythms. The bridge shimmered like silk in starlight, but when the light shifted, she saw what it truly was. Strands of hair, braided together, gold, black, and silver, each fiber smoldering softly at the edges. The air reeked of scorched divinity. Every gust of wind carried a faint hiss, like whispers trapped inside ash. Air halted beside her. "The gods' hair," she murmured, "cut and burned when their bodies fell into the sea of flame. The dwarves wove it to bind what remained of them. None were meant to cross it. Kjell ran his hand along the first braid, wincing as heat rose through his calloused skin. "It sings," he said, "not a song of life, the sound of what can't forgive." Indeed, the bridge was alive with voices. Each strand thrummed with the memory of its owner. Thunder in one, weeping in another, a chorus of fury braided into the silence between steps. The first time Liv placed her foot upon it, the hum in her palm flared. The thread of firelight within her hand pulsed, answering the bridge's lament. The hair beneath her boot shifted as though breathing. A scream erupted, brief, metallic, piercing. It wasn't heard so much as felt, vibrating through bone and thought. She staggered back, clutching her chest. Air steadied her. "You heard his death," she said softly. "Each strand remembers the moment it was torn from its god. You must listen through it, not to it." Liv took a breath and nodded. Together, the three began their crossing. Each step was an act of endurance. The heat grew worse, the light around them thick as molten glass. The screams didn't stop. They evolved, shifting from anguish to pleading, from pleading to confession. The bridge's song was not a torment alone. It was a chronicle. Every echo was a memory of what gods had failed to protect, of the worlds that fell while they looked upward instead of within. Kjell walked at the front, his shoulders bowed but steady. His hammer hung silent at his back, the metal absorbing each cry like a penance. Air followed with her staff glowing dimly, her blind eyes open and unflinching. Liv moved between them, the starlit needle tied at her wrist. With each scream she felt something pull at her, not her body, but her memories, like unseen hands rifling through them, seeking a thread they could claim. At the bridge's midpoint, the abyss below opened wider. There was no visible end, only motion, not downward, but inward, a spiral of light and shadow folding upon itself. The air shimmered with the faint scent of salt and blood. Beneath the roar of the burning braid, Liv heard words forming inside the noise. "Why do you walk upon us?" She froze. The voice wasn't one. It was many, 1,000 divine throats braided into a single, trembling question. "To finish what you began," Liv said, unsure if the sound left her mouth or her mind. "We began nothing. We ended everything. Then let this be the beginning again." The bridge shook. The strands writhed, the fire brightening until the heat blistered her skin. Kjell turned back, shouting above the din, "It's testing her." Air lifted her staff and drove it into the glowing braid. The motion was both prayer and defiance. "She carries your last spark," she said, voice clear as a bell. "If she falls, you fall with her. Let the song continue." The trembling ceased. The fire steadied, no longer burning but breathing. The bridge's scream softened into low murmurs, the sound of gods remembering. Liv pressed onward. Her hair began to lift in the dry heat, the ends glowing faintly as though catching stray embers. Each step grew lighter, the burning fading to warmth. When she looked down, she saw that the braid beneath her was changing. The gold threads brightened to white. The black turned translucent. The silver cooled to the color of moonlight on calm water. The screams shifted too, from pain to laughter, from laughter to music. At the far end of the bridge, a gate waited. 2 pillars of bone taller than any hall in Asgard, bound together by a single strand of untouched hair. It glowed neither red nor gold, but a color that had no name, the hue of forgiveness glimpsed too late. As they reached the gate, the bridge behind them began to unravel. The fiery braids loosened, strands lifting one by one into the air, ascending like smoke that had remembered it was light. The screams were gone now. Only a sigh remained, a collective exhale that rolled across the abyss like wind over water. Kjell bowed his head. The gods are finally quiet. Air smiled faintly. Quiet is not silence. It is peace. Liv lifted the needle. The single hair across the gate thrummed softly, inviting her forward. "Then let peace open the way," she whispered. She touched the needle to the strand. Light bloomed outward in ripples, dissolving the gate into radiance. Beyond it lay no hall, no throne, no heaven. Only a vast plain of shimmering light, neither past nor future, where the hum of the world became indistinguishable from her own pulse. The bridge vanished behind them, every scream transfigured into song. The scent of burned hair turned sweet, like rain on cold stone. Air turned to her, her blind eyes shining. You've crossed where even gods dared not look back. Liv exhaled slowly. And what waits now? Kjell answered, voice quiet as cooling metal. Whatever remembers us. And in the distance, where the horizon melted into light, the loom of the world began to reassemble itself, not with order, but with compassion. Each thread it drew was one of mercy. Each flame, a memory forgiven. They found her where light refused to rest, beyond the bridge of burning hair. The world lost its distinction between distance and nearness. The plain ahead was neither land nor sky, but a fabric of slow-moving darkness, alive, deliberate, breathing in waves. The air shimmered with the residue of the god's silence, and each breath the travelers took seemed to ripple through the void as though disturbing the surface of a deep black sea. At first, Liv thought of her own shadow lengthening unnaturally, but then it detached, rose, and gathered shape, a figure emerging as if peeled from her outline, cloaked in night, so dense it seemed to absorb time. She stepped forward soundlessly. Her face was hidden, yet every fold of her presence felt familiar, like a memory Liv had been born forgetting. Air's staff vibrated against the ground. She's not of the living. Kjell's hand moved to the hammer at his back, though his eyes softened. Nor the dead. The figure tilted her head, and the darkness around her shimmered like a veil drawn aside. When she spoke, her voice was not a single tone but a harmony of three, soft, resonant, and hollow, echoing as though from deep within the bones of the world. Not of life, not of death, she said, of what comes after. Liv stepped forward, the needle of starlight catching faint silver from nowhere. Who are you? The shadowed woman extended one pale hand from beneath her cloak. It was slender, unadorned, yet her fingers trailed faint tendrils of ink that coiled in the air like smoke. I am what the Norns chose to forget, she said. I am Ska, the Fourth Sister, weaver of endings. Air's lips parted in disbelief. The Norns had no fourth. Ska smiled beneath her hood, and the darkness rippled in response. That is what they wanted you to believe. They wove beginnings, middles, and what they thought were ends. But the true end, the undoing of pattern, the quiet unspooling of the thread, was mine. They feared me, so they wrote me out of their fabric. They thought if they could erase the weaver of endings, the world would never need to stop singing. Her voice grew quieter, but the silence that followed was heavy, like a door sealed, and so it sang until it broke. Liv felt the thread beneath her skin grow hot, a vibration thrumming that matched the rhythm of Ska's speech. You've been watching us, she said. I have been waiting for you, Ska replied. When my sisters unraveled themselves, they left gaps in the fabric. I filled those gaps with shadow. You walk now upon my domain, where every song must one day finish its last note. Air took a step closer, her face calm but her voice trembling. If you weave endings, what do you want from us? We have come to mend the world, not bury it. Ska's laughter was a sound of wind in an empty hall, soft, sorrowful, unending. You cannot mend what refuses to die. The loom you seek to repair has been spinning the same grief for eternity. You close one wound and another opens. I am not your enemy, seamstress. I am your completion. Liv's hand tightened around the starlit needle. Completion sounds like loss. Not loss, Ska said, stepping nearer. The shadows clung to her, as though afraid to let her go. Release. She raised her hand, and from her palm unfurled a single thread of black silk, darker than the void, yet shimmering faintly with stars buried within it. This is the thread of stillness. Where your needle stitches life, mine unravels what no longer belongs. She glanced toward Air. Your silence, healer, was born of me. The calm before the crossing, the moment before the breath stops. That is my song. You have always served me, though you did not know my name. Air lowered her head. Then why reveal yourself now? Because the fabric is closing, Ska said. You are remaking what should have rested. The world you mend will live again, but it will carry every shadow it refuses to acknowledge, unless I am written back into it. Kjell's eyes burned like forge embers. You want to be part of the new weave. I must be, Ska said simply. Without me, there is no completion. A song without silence is madness. A thread without end strangles itself. Liv looked down at her palm, where her mother's memory had once lived, and saw that it pulsed faintly in two lights now. Gold and black, fire and void. If I use your thread, she asked, what will happen? Ska approached until the edge of her cloak brushed the air around Liv, dimming the light. Every stitch will heal faster, but each will also erase what never needed to be remembered. You will make peace not through wholeness, but through mercy. Air's blind gaze turned toward Liv. Endings are as sacred as beginnings. Liv hesitated. And what happens to us? Ska smiled sadly. You will fade into the tapestry you repair. Not lost, preserved. Every mender becomes part of what they restore. The gods did once. So must you. For a long time, no one spoke. The vast plain rippled, the horizon breathing softly, waiting. Then Liv extended her free hand. Then give me the shadow thread. Ska placed it gently into her palm. The moment it touched skin, the starlight within the needle dimmed, and a new glow bloomed, subtle, silver-black, as though the needle had learned humility. The two lights, fire and shadow, twined together, perfect opposites in balance. You will not see me again, Ska said, her voice almost tender, but you will feel me in every goodbye the world learns to make. She stepped backward, the folds of her cloak unraveling into mist. For an instant, Liv saw beneath the hood, a face neither young nor old, neither kind nor cruel, painted in starlight and forgetting. Then she was gone, dissolving into the horizon like ink into water. Kjell released a long breath. So even endings have mothers. Air smiled faintly. And we have just met ours. Liv stood alone for a moment, the needle trembling between her fingers. The hum of the world had changed again, deeper now, slower, but at peace. She lifted the needle toward the horizon, where light and darkness wove together seamlessly. Then let the world remember its shadow, she whispered, so it can learn to begin again. And somewhere, deep in the unlit folds of the sky, Ska's voice answered like a lullaby. Every thread must one day loosen. Every song must breathe between its notes. Weaving is not defiance of death. It is the grace of knowing when to let go. The plane of light had no horizon anymore, only the illusion of one, painted by memory. The air shimmered as if remembering shape, and the hum beneath Liv's skin had grown so constant it felt indistinguishable from her heartbeat. They had walked for what might have been hours or years, when the world ahead of them fractured with a soundless crack. Before them rose a mirror. It was vast, taller than mountains, stretching from the pale ground into the unfathomable dark above. But it was not made of glass. It was woven from threads of liquid silver, each strand trembling as though uncertain it wished to exist. Faces and landscapes swam faintly within it, like reflections caught halfway between remembering and forgetting. Air stopped first. The mirror of unwritten names, she whispered. Every life not yet completed, every death not yet claimed. It waits for those who have stepped outside their pattern. Kjell exhaled slowly. Then it's waiting for her. Liv could feel it before she saw it. The surface rippled and pulled, and in the mirror she saw herself, not once but threefold. Three reflections stood side by side, each version of her anchored in a different world. In the first, she stood on a frozen shore, her hair streaked white, her hands red from mending a sky that refused to stay closed. In the second, she lay within a city of light, her chest pierced by her own starlit needle, her face serene as if she had sewn herself into peace. In the third, she knelt before a blackened sea, whispering to it like a lover, as its tide rose to claim her. Each image breathed, each blinked, each watched her with the calm of someone who already knew how the story ended. Liv felt her throat tighten. These are the deaths I've already chosen, she said softly. No, Air murmured. They are the endings you refuse to accept. The mirror pulsed, and the air thickened with the sound of threads stretching. The starlit needle at Liv's wrist began to hum. Not gently this time, but sharply, like a blade demanding to be used. The reflection to her left, the one by the frozen shore, raised its hand in perfect sync. It held a needle, too. Liv flinched backward. The reflection smiled. The mirror rippled. "She's me," Liv whispered, "and she's trying to finish what I wouldn't." Kiel took a step forward, but Air stopped her with a touch to his arm. She must decide how to weave her own survival. The reflections moved closer, their eyes glowing faintly with the same firelight that lived beneath Liv's skin. When they spoke, their voices overlapped, 3 tones forming one perfect chord of inevitability. The thread cannot hold all worlds. One must break, so the others may remain. Liv's hand shook. "Then I'll sew over it," she said. "I'll stitch the break closed." The figures in the mirror tilted their heads, as though amused. To mend yourself is to erase yourself. "Then I'll be what's left after the erasing," Liv said and lifted the needle. The mirror pulsed once, approvingly, perhaps, or hungrily. She stepped closer. Her breath fogged the surface, and the reflections followed every movement. She could feel their fear, their yearning, their certainty. Each of them was a truth she could have lived, each a thread too precious to cut. But survival had never meant choosing life over death. It had meant choosing continuance. She touched the point of the needle to the mirror. The surface resisted at first, dense as frozen water. Then it gave way with a hiss, rippling outward in rings of molten silver. Liv began to sew. The needle's light left trails across the reflections, lines of gold that crossed through eyes, through hearts, through the very air that divided them. The mirror screamed, not in pain, but in recognition. Its sound filled the plain, a harmony of 1,000 unfinished lives crying out to be remembered. Each stitch she made pulled one reflection closer to her until all 3 began to merge. The woman by the frozen sea, the one pierced by her own needle, the one whispering to the black tide. Their faces overlapped, their hands reaching for hers. The final thread tightened, and then, with a flash like the tearing of dawn, the mirror went still. When the light faded, there was only one reflection left. Hers. Pale, trembling, alive. But her face looked slightly different, as though the other versions had left traces behind. A faint scar across her cheek, frost in her hair, a glimmer of sorrow behind her eyes. She felt the cost immediately. The memory that vanished was small but perfect. The sound of her own laugh when she was a child, chasing the tide with her mother. It was gone, no echo, no trace. But in its place was strength, raw and aching. Air approached quietly. "You stitched over your own death." Liv nodded. "I didn't want to erase who I might have been, so I carried them into me instead." Kiel's gaze softened. "Then you are 3 songs bound in one thread, strong enough to finish the weaving." The mirror shivered one last time. Its silver surface dulled, then cracked, lines branching out like veins across its expanse. Through those fissures shone a deep, steady glow, the same hue as the first tear in the sky. And from within came a whisper. "Every life undone adds its color to the weave. You have chosen to live not once, but endlessly." Liv turned away as the mirror dissolved into mist, leaving only the faintest hum behind, a note that trembled in perfect harmony with her pulse. The world around her shimmered, unsteady but beautiful, like fabric catching light from both sides at once. She breathed out, the air tasting of frost and ash and promise. "Then let the weave remember every version of me," she said, "even the ones that died." Air smiled faintly. "It already does." And in the distance, beyond the plain, beyond the edge of what had ever been, the sound of the loom returned, faint but rising, its song now threaded with the rhythm of a mortal heart that refused to stop beating. The first stitch drew a whisper. The second drew light. By the third, the sky began to bleed. It started as a tremor, a faint shimmer spreading across the upper air like frost melting in reverse. Then the heavens split open, the same wound that had once begun all of this, only now it was listening. Liv's needle moved through the air as if it were cloth, the thread of fire and shadow passing easily through the fabric of creation. Every motion drew a sound, a sigh from the wind, a hum from the mountains, a heartbeat from the sea. But the sky could not bear to stay whole under such a song. Each stitch Liv made loosen something in the constellations. The stars shivered, trembled, and began to fall, slow at first, then in showers, burning silver white as they descended. They left trails like weeping wounds across the firmament. When they struck the ground, they did not fade but melted, each droplet of starlight seeping into earth and stone, leaving behind scorched circles of shimmering frost that hissed with faint whispers. The whispers were memories, snatches of voices long gone, laughter, prayers, the dying songs of heroes. The ground itself began to echo them, as though the world were remembering everything at once. Air lifted her blind gaze to the raining stars, her staff trembling in her hands. She's pulling the heavens down. Kiel stood beside her, face lit by the reflection of falling light. Not down, he murmured. Through. Liv stood in the center of it all, her body haloed in a glow that looked neither mortal nor divine. The needle moved in her hand like an extension of her breath, each movement confident and terrible. She didn't need to see where to stitch anymore. The thread knew where to go. She could feel the world beneath her tugging upward, desperate to join with the broken sky. The rain grew heavier. The silver drops hissed as they struck her skin, burning not with heat, but with remembrance. Each one that touched her brought with it a fragment of the past. The first song of the river, the cry of the Norns when they unraveled themselves, the laughter of Skaia's sisters when they first learned that even eternity could end. She gasped, staggering under the weight of it. The memories were not hers, yet they filled her as if they had always been waiting for her body to remember them. She could see through them, flashes of other worlds, other lives she had never lived. Air as a winged goddess, Kiel hammering suns instead of swords, herself standing in a hall of mirrors with no reflection. The rain fell faster, harder, until the plain became a sea of molten silver. The stars above dimmed as their essence poured downward, feeding the river that now shimmered around Liv's feet. The needle blazed in her hand, the black and gold threads burning together into a single luminous strand, the final union of fire and shadow. Kiel shouted over the roar of falling light. Liv, you have to stop. You're tearing it open again. But Liv only smiled faintly, her face streaked with silver tears that burned trails down her cheeks. No, she said, her voice trembling but certain. I'm mending it the way it was meant to be. The sky forgot the ground. The stars forgot their own reflection. I'm just teaching them to remember. The next stitch cut through the air like thunder. The ground shuddered. Mountains bowed as though exhaling. The silver rain thickened into mist, coating everything it touched in light. The burns it left were not wounds but marks. Constellations reflected in the soil, stars now embedded in earth. Air fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the sound. They're becoming one, she whispered. The heavens and the world, they're weaving into each other. Kiel's voice was low, awed. If she keeps going, there'll be no sky left, no separation between above and below. Maybe that's what the gods feared, Air murmured. A world that no longer needed them to tell it where heaven ended. Liv made another stitch. This time, the thread cut to the heart of the storm, binding the last stars to the soil. The silver rain slowed, each drop hanging in the air before sinking quietly into the new fabric of the world. The light around her dimmed to a steady pulse, the same heartbeat she had heard since the sky's first tear. And then silence. The storm was over. The stars were gone from the heavens. In their place stretched a vast expanse of pale, living light, neither sky nor ground, but both. It shimmered like silk spread between two mirrors. Every breath of wind carried a faint metallic scent, like memory newly forged. Liv lowered her needle. Her hands trembled. The thread was nearly spent. Air approached slowly, her robes glowing faintly with the residue of starlight. You've undone the distance between the worlds. Liv looked up, tears silvering her lashes. I didn't mean to undo it. I meant to heal it. But maybe healing and undoing are the same thing. Kiel placed a hand on her shoulder. His skin burned where the rain had touched him. Then the wound is ours now, and it is beautiful. The sky above them pulsed faintly, as if breathing. From its folds, a few remaining stars drifted downward, not falling, but returning, settling softly upon the earth like seeds. Wherever they landed, small flowers of light began to grow, their petals transparent and humming. Air smiled faintly. The heavens bleed memory, so that the earth may bloom remembrance. Liv gazed upward, her eyes full of both exhaustion and wonder, then let them grow. The final thread unraveled from her needle, vanishing into the silver-soaked air. The hum of the world deepened one last time, turning into a low, eternal note. The sound of completion, of sky and soil remembering they had once been the same. And where Liv stood, the stars gathered, bowing toward her as if greeting one of their own. They reached the hall at the edge of the new dawn, a place built not of stone or sky, but of language that had forgotten how to die. It rose out of the silver mist like a cathedral of echoes, its walls formed from parchment and woven ink, layers upon layers of prophecy that fluttered with their own breath. Each step Liv took sent waves of whispers rippling through the corridors, words brushing against her skin like moth wings. The doors opened of their own accord, sighing as though relieved to be touched again. Inside, the air was dry and brittle, heavy with the scent of old paper, ash, and lightning trapped between syllables. Thousands of scrolls hung suspended in the air, unwound and trembling, their words glowing faintly in a spectrum of shifting colors. Some wrote and rewrote themselves even as she watched. Others bled ink like open wounds. Air's blind eyes widened slightly, her staff trembling in her hand. "The Hall of Broken Prophecies," she murmured. "Every future the gods declared, and every one they failed to keep." Kjell moved carefully beside her, brushing away flakes of ash that fell like snow. "Why bring us here?" he asked. Liv didn't answer. She could feel the hum of the hall vibrating through her bones, the same rhythm that had followed her since the first tear in the sky. But this place sang with conflict, a chorus of voices trying to overwrite each other. The scrolls whispered as she passed, her name, her fate, her undoing. And then, just as quickly, they fell silent, as if realizing she was not the Liv they had written about. One parchment unfurled before her, the script shifting in and out of existence. The seamstress will close the wound and become its scar. The words glowed bright, then darkened, curling at the edges. Fire bloomed where the ink had been, consuming the prophecy before she could finish reading. The ash rose and reformed into a new sentence. The seamstress will forget her hands. Liv stepped back. It's rewriting itself. Air nodded grimly. Prophecy can't exist where fate has been unmade. Every word burns trying to remember what it once meant. Kjell reached toward one of the hanging scrolls. The instant his fingers brushed the parchment, it screamed, an unearthly shriek of torn metal and wind. Flames ran along the script, turning into smoke that formed the outline of a man with a hammer, his face the same as Kjell's, his mouth opening in silence before collapsing into soot. Kjell's eyes darkened. That was one of me. Air laid a hand on his arm. No, it was one the gods expected. Liv moved deeper into the hall, the needle at her wrist glowing faintly. The thread hummed in sympathy with the burning prophecies, its light flickering with each collapse. "They tried to write everything," she said softly. "Every act, every word, every death. And when the Norns unraveled themselves, the writing lost its anchor. Now the futures tear themselves apart because they have no hand to hold them steady." Air's voice lowered. "Then perhaps that is what you are meant to be, the new hand." Liv paused. "You mean to rewrite fate?" "No," said Air. "To forgive it." The hall trembled. Scrolls began to fall, fluttering like wounded birds. As they struck the floor, the words upon them burst into flame. The fires didn't consume the parchment. They freed it, turning each line into sound. The air filled with voices, the cries of unborn kings, the prayers of forgotten gods, the laughter of mortals who never were. The cacophony was unbearable and beautiful. Liv pressed her palms to her ears. "It won't stop." Air raised her staff, and a wave of calm rippled outward. The voices hushed to a murmur. "It's not meant to stop," she said. "It's meant to listen." The fires dimmed, the smoke swirling upward into faint constellations on the vaulted ceiling. Liv stepped into their glow and lifted the starlit needle, then let it listen to truth. She pressed the point of the needle into the nearest scroll. The moment it touched, the script shuddered and ink poured outward like blood. The fire around it went cold. New letters emerged, not written by her hand, but by the needle itself. They glowed in alternating gold and black. The world no longer seeks prophecy. It seeks promise. The other scrolls reacted instantly. Lines of ink ride, reshaping themselves to mirror the new phrase. The fire that had devoured them shifted hue, burning blue and silver instead of gold. The whispers changed too, softer now, more human. Kiel stared upward. You've changed the language of fate. Liv shook her head slowly. No, I reminded it what it once was. The gods wrote fear. I write hope. The hall responded with a deep vibration that shook the air itself. Scrolls burst open in radiant waves, their words no longer threatening to burn but to bloom. Sentences unfolded into petals of light, each one bearing the echo of a story rewritten. Not destiny, but possibility. Air smiled faintly, tears glinting in her sightless eyes. The future refuses to stay written, because it has learned how to live. Liv looked around at the ocean of luminous petals drifting through the hall, at the gentle fires that now warmed instead of destroyed. The needle dimmed, its work done. Then the hall of broken prophecies, she whispered, was never meant to predict. It was meant to teach us how to begin again. Kiel picked up one of the petals as it floated past, the glowing script fading softly against his fingers. And what does this one say? Liv leaned close to read it. The letters flickered, reshaping into a simple sentence that made her heart ache. Remember what you mended, even when it forgets you. Outside, the silver rain began again, but this time it was cool, gentle, and sweet, carrying no burn, no memory, only reflection. The sky shimmered, as if the stars themselves were leaning closer to read what the world had chosen to write. The hall pulsed once, as though breathing, and then fell still. And the future, unwritten, unafraid, waited, listening. The road to Nibelheim was not carved, but remembered. It began at the edge of the silver horizon, where the last fires of prophecy faded into quiet ash. The air grew still there, and the light thinned into threads of pale blue. Each step Liv took drew frost from the ground, her footprints freezing into patterns that glowed faintly, runes that spelled her name in a language that didn't exist anymore. The air smelled of iron and winter's first breath. Air walked at her side, the ends of her robe whispering against the frozen earth. Kiel followed behind, his hammer muffled in frost, the heat of his forge light dimmed but not extinguished. None of them spoke. The hum of the world had gone low and distant, as though they were entering a place where even sound forgot itself. When they reached the threshold, the sky above them opened, not with light but with silence. It fell like snow, slow and deliberate, blanketing the path ahead. And in that silence stood a figure taller than memory, cloaked in ice that shone with the clarity of tears. The Frost King. His crown was made of frozen lightning, his eyes deep wells of pale fire. His breath froze before leaving his lips, shaping words that lingered in the air like frost runes. The wind that passed through him sang faintly, as if it had once been human. Liv bowed her head. Lord of Nibelheim, she said softly, we seek the eternal thread. The Frost King smiled, and the gesture cracked the air. Do you now? Many have asked for it. Seamstress. None have been willing to pay the cost. His voice was slow, deliberate, a glacier speaking to a flame. What would you give to bind what even death will not hold? Liv met his gaze, unflinching. Whatever remains of me. He regarded her for a long moment, then lifted one hand. The air shimmered, and from behind him stepped a shadow, his own. It moved separately, its edges dripping darkness like ink dissolving in snow. It reached for him but could not touch. Its hand passed through his chest like smoke through water. I am sundered, said the Frost King. The curse of my immortality was division. My shadow remembers every cruelty, every winter I refused to end. I gave the world frost, but kept none for myself. The gods took pity on no one, not even their monsters. He looked down at Liv. Sew me back together. Bind shadow to flesh. Do this, and you may have what you seek, the eternal thread. But know this, seamstress, the stitch that closes me will open you. Air took a step forward. You ask her to die. The Frost King turned toward her, his expression neither cruel nor kind. I ask her to finish what began when the sky first tore. To mend a god's regret is no small mercy. Kiel placed a hand on Liv's shoulder. You don't have to do this. Liv looked up at him. Yes, I do. Every stitch so far has been for others, for worlds, for memories, for gods. Maybe this one is for peace. She stepped forward. The needle in her hand glowed faintly, the fire thread within it whispering. The shadow flinched from its light, curling away like smoke. Liv touched the Frost King's chest. The ice beneath her hand thrummed, alive and fragile. "I'll need both your consent," she said gently to him and to his shadow. The Frost King nodded once. His shadow trembled, then extended its hand, touching her wrist. It was cold beyond sensation, a void that ached. Liv threaded her needle with the last strand of the black and gold filament. The thread of fire and shadow united. The light dimmed as she began to sew. The first stitch sank into ice and passed through the shadow's edge. The sound it made was not a crack, but a sigh, long and ancient, the sound of something remembering warmth. As the thread pulled tight, light spilled from the wound, not white, but a deep, soft blue, the color of mercy. With every stitch, the Frost King's form softened. The glaciers in his crown melted into rivers of light that flowed upward, carrying with them faint whispers of his name. The shadow leaned closer, fusing into him, its edges dissolving into mist. Liv's hands shook, her breath freezing with every exhale, but she kept going. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly as she worked. The Frost King's voice was distant now, fading like snow in spring. "Only the winters I made longer than they needed to be." The final stitch closed with a sound like breaking glass. But instead of shattering, the Frost King simply melted. His crown dissolved, his body turning to light that spread across the frost like morning over still water. The shadow was gone. The ice became rain. And when it was over, all that remained where he had stood was a single spool of thread, clear as crystal, glowing softly from within. It pulsed with the rhythm of eternity, yet it hummed gently, humbly, as if asking to be used rather than worshipped. Liv bent to pick it up. The frost didn't burn her this time. The spool was warm in her hands, pulsing with faint life. Air bowed her head. "He's free." Kjell nodded slowly. "And his peace is ours to carry." Liv stared at the thread in her palm. "The eternal thread," she whispered, "woven from a god's final sigh." The air around them shimmered, and for a moment, snowflakes fell, each one bearing within it a memory of the Frost King's reign, each one dissolving into light before touching the ground. Then, as quietly as the end of a breath, the hum returned. The world exhaled. Liv turned toward the horizon, the spool glowing in her hands. "The weave is almost ready," she said. "And so am I." Air smiled faintly. "Every ending you mend teaches the world a new beginning." And as they walked out of Nibelheim, the frost did not follow. It stayed behind, melting into rivers that sang, not of death, but of release. The valley of mist appeared just beyond the reach of memory, in a hollow so quiet that even time hesitated to breathe there. The light that guided them from Nibelheim dimmed as they descended, until only the faint glow of Liv's eternal thread illuminated the path ahead. Not a light of heat, but of remembrance. At first it looked like fog spilling from the earth, rolling and folding upon itself in silence. But as they drew nearer, the fog shimmered, thousands of translucent forms drifting over a still lake, each one glowing faintly from within. They weren't ghosts. They weren't even echoes. They were possibilities. Souls that had never lived long enough to gather weight. Air knelt beside the water's edge. Her blind gaze turned upward. "The lake of still births," she whispered. "Every life the world conceived but never carried. Every song that began and forgot its first note." Kjell bowed his head. So much silence pretending to be calm. Liv approached slowly. The surface of the lake was smooth as glass, but beneath it, light moved like breath, slow, uncertain, alive. When she looked down, the mist gathered around her reflection, shaping small, faceless figures that reached up toward her hand. Their touch left no ripple, only a trembling in the air. "They want to be seen," Liv murmured. "They want to exist," Air said softly. "But they cannot step into the pattern. They have no place in the weave." The eternal thread pulsed in Liv's palm, its glow shifting from white to blue. "Then maybe they can have a place in the sky." Air tilted her head. "The sky has no need of birth or death." "Exactly," Liv said. "It remembers without living. It holds everything and asks for nothing. The lake brightened as she spoke, as if listening. The soul stirred, rising from the water like a slow exhale of light. Their shapes were weightless, some barely human, others only ideas of form, the suggestion of faces that had never been named. Their glow reflected in Liv's eyes, turning them the color of dawn under ice. She raised her needle. The thread unraveled of its own accord, shimmering like liquid glass. The first stitch she made pierced the surface of the lake and the sky at once, as if the two had always been one. Silver blue light spiraled outward and a hum filled the valley, soft at first, then building harmonic, like the sound of breath becoming a lullaby. Each motion drew a line of light from the mist, pulling the souls upward, one by one. As the needle moved, their forms dissolved into trails of brightness that climbed into the heavens and held fast, forming new constellations, not gods nor kings but gentle things. A cradle, a tear, a hand holding another. Kiel watched with quiet awe. She's stitching stars from what was never born. Air pressed a hand to her chest. No, she's teaching the unborn how to belong. Liv's tears fell as she worked. Silver drops that hissed softly when they touched the lake. Every life deserves a place to rest, she whispered, even the ones that never began. As she sewed, the mist thickened around her until she seemed to stand inside the reflection itself. Her silhouette mirrored infinitely between water and sky. The souls moved closer, curious, drifting like children around a storyteller. Some brushed her shoulders. Others clung to the thread, as if recognizing themselves in its glow. The constellations above continued to multiply. With each stitch, the stars changed tone, from cold to warm, from static to song. Soon the night was filled with quiet music, a rhythm pulsing between the sky and the lake, each note the sigh of a soul finding peace. Air wiped her tears. She's giving them endings they never had. Kiel nodded, voice low, and by doing so, she's writing the gentlest beginning the world's ever seen. When the last stitch was made, the thread hummed once and went still. The mist that remained drifted toward the heavens, trailing silver ribbons of light that intertwined with the newborn constellations. The lake's surface cleared, revealing only reflections of stars, no longer mournful but serene. Liv knelt, exhausted, her hands trembling. "They're gone," she whispered. Air placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, they're home." The constellations above shimmered faintly, and the shapes they formed changed once more. Among the cradle, the hand, and the tear appeared a new figure, a woman sewing the night itself, her hair woven with frost and her needle burning like a comet. Kiel smiled. "You're part of their sky now." Liv gazed upward. "Then maybe they'll never feel forgotten." The lake gave one last sigh, ripples expanding outward until the surface stilled completely. The reflection of the stars glowed faintly, and for the briefest moment, the constellations moved, bowing their light toward her in gratitude. Air whispered, "Even what was never born can give light." Liv nodded, her eyes glistening with the reflection of the sky she had remade. "And even what was never remembered can still become part of the song." The mist settled, soft as breath, and the night above them shone brighter than any the world had ever known, a sky full of possibilities that never learned to die. The forge was quiet again, though the heat inside it never truly left. The last time Kiel had stood before his anvil, it had been to make peace with the frost and the gods. Now he stood alone, surrounded by the ghosts of his own craftsmanship. The walls of the cavern still glowed faintly from the eternal thread Liv had left behind, their light trembling like memory caught between breaths. He stared at the weapon that had once defined him, the blade called Sorrow's Edge, forged for kings baptized in blood. It had sung louder than any truth he had ever spoken. He had carried it through wars that had outlasted reason, through fields where the dead never stopped whispering. Now it lay cracked in two across his anvil, still humming faintly, as if unwilling to die. Air had told him that the world was mending, that Liv's stitches were closing the wounds between realms. But Kiel knew that no world could heal while the hands that built its weapons remained unpurified. He laid his palms flat against the cold metal. "Forgive me," he whispered. The blade vibrated, not in anger but recognition. It knew his voice. It had known the rhythm of his heart in battle. the weight of his grief afterward. And now it would know his repentance. He lifted his hammer. Each strike echoed not with violence, but with sorrow turned to purpose. Sparks leapt from the steel and hung in the air longer than they should have, drifting like stars reluctant to fade. The sound of metal meeting metal changed slowly, from a clang to a pulse, from pulse to heartbeat. The war inside him was dying. Kjell melted down the blade completely, its edge dissolving into molten light. When he poured it into the mold, he did not shape a weapon. He shaped a needle, long, slender, and strong enough to pierce even silence. The metal cooled slowly, taking on a sheen not of iron, but polished dusk, dark yet luminous, as if it contained every sunrise it had once denied. When he lifted it, the needle hummed in his hands, not the way sword hum, not for battle, but the way creation hums before it speaks. He thought of Liv, somewhere far above, stitching stars and unremembered lives into constellations. He thought of Air's voice, her calm certainty that mercy was not an act but a choice made over and over. And he understood what his own thread would be. He opened the forge's last fire, the one the dwarves had once said burned at the heart of all things. He held the needle over it and whispered the names of every soul he had taken, one by one. He did not plead. He did not beg. He remembered, the air filled with a faint shimmer of voices answering back, not in condemnation, but in weary forgiveness. The flames cooled to silver, and when they finally died, the needle's surface bore faint markings, hundreds of tiny runes glowing like starlight. Each rune was a name he had spoken aloud. Air entered then, her staff glimmering faintly in the forge's afterglow. "You've unmade your war," she said softly. Kjell nodded. "No, I've given it purpose." He handed her the needle. "For creation," he said. "For what must come next." Air smiled, her unseeing eyes reflecting the glimmer of the runes. Even iron can learn to forgive itself. When she left, Kjell stood alone in the silence. The forge no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like breath, like the heartbeat of something beginning again. He looked up at the ceiling, where the cracks glowed faintly with starlight from Liv's constellations far above, and spoke quietly to no one and everyone. May all things broken remember they can be made again. The forge answered him, not with flame, but with a single note of music. The sound lingered long after he walked away, a lullaby of steel reborn. The night before the final dawn, Air asked for silence. They had camped beside the lake Liv had turned to stars, its surface now calm and endless. Above them, the constellations whispered faintly, not words but rhythms, like breath drawn through harp strings. Liv and Kjell rested near the embers of a small fire, their voices low, their eyes heavy with a piece of exhaustion. But Air sat apart, staff across her knees, her white eyes turned toward the darkness where sky and water touched. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "what makes a wound refuse to heal?" Liv looked up. "Pain." Air smiled faintly. "No, love." She reached into the folds of her cloak and drew out a small piece of gold, a ring, tarnished and bent. It caught the faint light of the fire and trembled like a heartbeat trying to begin again. "This," she said, "belonged to him." Kjell lifted his gaze. "A lover?" Air nodded. "Once. Long ago. Before I was blind. Before the world began to unravel. He was immortal, brave, and gentle. I was still a Valkyrie then, sworn to guide the souls of the fallen to the place they had earned. He fought in a war the gods themselves turned their faces from. When he fell, I came for him, but I hesitated. I loved him too much to know where he belonged." Her voice trembled now, soft and precise, as though afraid of shattering the air. "So I made a choice I was never meant to make. I guided him not to Valhalla, where his courage had earned him rest, but to Hell, the quiet realm, the one of forgetting. I thought it would be kinder. No feast, no endless battle, no remembrance of pain. Only peace." Liv's hand went to her chest. "And he stayed there?" Air's blind eyes glistened faintly. "Yes. And when the Norns saw what I'd done, they stripped me of sight. They said that if I loved the soul enough to choose its rest over its honor, then I had no right to see the difference between the two." The fire hissed softly. A star fell in the distance, its reflection splitting the lake in two. Kjell spoke, his voice low. And the blindness, did it end your service? No, Air said. It changed it. She turned her face upward, toward the invisible stars. Without sight, I began to hear differently. The dead who feared the dark found comfort in my voice. I became the Valkyrie who guided those who were neither heroes nor monsters, but simply lost. Those the gods forgot. Perhaps it was punishment, but it became purpose. Liv rose and went to her, kneeling beside her on the frost. Does he know? The man you loved. Air smiled, and for the first time in centuries, she looked young. He forgave me the night the sky first tore. I heard his voice in the wind that carried the falling stars. He said, "You chose my peace over your heaven. That is love." The ring in her hand began to warm, a faint pulse of gold flickering through the cracks. She held it out toward Liv. Every mender must leave one wound untouched, so that they remember why they began to sew. This is mine. Liv touched the ring gently. It hummed once, as if sighing. Air, she whispered, you never guided the wrong soul. You guided it where mercy lives. Air turned her face toward Liv, though her eyes saw nothing. Then may mercy guide me now. I have stitched others into the pattern. Perhaps it's time I accept my own place in it. The lake shimmered behind them. The constellations above bent slightly, realigning into a new shape. A woman holding a ring, her face uplifted toward unseen light. Kjell's voice was a murmur. The Valkyrie's confession becomes her absolution. Air smiled through her tears. All forgiveness begins with a story told aloud. And in that silence that followed, the stars burned a little brighter, as if remembering that even the gods could be wrong, and even the punished could be redeemed. It began softly, so softly that Liv mistook it for wind moving through the grass. They had left the lake behind, following the faint pull of the eternal thread toward the heart of the world. But as the air thinned and the stars settled lower around them, the hum inside Liv's chest changed. It was no longer the deep vibration of earth and sky in unison. It had become melody. The thread at her wrist glowed gold, its light flickering like a heartbeat set to music. Each pulse carried a note, not random but deliberate. The outline of a song too old to remember being written. The sound didn't pass through the air. It passed through her, resonating in bone and breath. Kjell heard it first. He stopped, head tilting toward the sound that wasn't there for him yet. Liv, he said softly, your thread is singing. Air turned her face toward the hum, her sightless eyes gleaming faintly. No, she whispered. It's not the thread. It's the ones who spun it. The sound grew clearer, 3 tones weaving around one another, like strands crossing and joining. Each voice was distinct, yet together they formed one continuous harmony that seemed to curve through every part of creation. The melody rose and fell in phrases that echoed with both grief and joy, like the sea remembering a storm long past. Liv pressed the thread against her chest. The music deepened immediately, blooming inside her ribs until her heartbeat joined it. Then came words, not in the language of mortals, but in a resonance she understood without understanding. The voices called her by name, not just her name as she knew it, but every name she had worn across lifetimes. Each syllable folded inside another like petals around a flame. Liv, we remember you. She fell to her knees. The thread in her hand shimmered between gold and white, and from its center spilled faint images, like memories caught in the weave. 3 women standing at a loom that no longer existed. Their faces were made of light and time. The Norns, Air breathed, but they were not the Norns as they had appeared before. Their forms now were fractured, spectral, pieces of themselves still caught in the patterns of the world. They did not speak with mouths but with vibration, their melody forming shapes in the air that Liv felt more than saw. You unmade the wound. Their voices sang through her. You closed what we could not. We unravel ourselves to end the prophecy. You wove the silence into song. Liv's throat tightened. Then why do you call me? Because the song is unfinished. The thread trembled violently, the hum climbing into a new key, not harsh but desperate, like a memory that refused to fade. The stars above brightened, aligning themselves into a spiral that stretched toward infinity. Within it, Liv could see every thread she had ever sewn. The sky, the river, the lake, the hall of burning prophecies, all connected, all alive, forming something vast and breathing. Your stitch closed the world, the voices continued. But to make it live, it must remember the singer who wove it. Kjell reached for her shoulder, but his hand halted in the air as a ripple of gold light circled her. Liv looked up, her eyes reflecting the shimmer of the thread. You mean I have to join it? Air's voice was low, full of awe and sorrow. The mender must become the seam. The melody swelled, and now Liv could hear something beneath it. Laughter, tears, every story ever told and left unfinished. The Norns were not commanding her. They were inviting her to complete the harmony. I'm not a god, she whispered. The three voices answered as one. No, you are what the gods forgot they were. The thread lifted from her palm, unraveling in loops of light that circled her head, her shoulders, her hands. It brushed against her lips and left warmth there, the taste of dawn. Every part of her that had ever belonged to a single life loosened, threads untying gently. Kjell fell to his knees beside her. Liv, don't. She looked at him and smiled, serene. Every song ends when it's finished, Kjell. But this one becomes everything else. The melody rose again, so pure it silenced the wind. Liv stood, arms open, her form dissolving into strands of gold that shimmered with each note. The Norns' voices entwined with hers until there was no separation, only the sound of creation remembering its own rhythm. Air whispered through tears, she's joining the weave. And then Liv's body became light. Her laughter carried on the final chord, a single note that folded to the stars and into the thread of the world itself. The golden strand settled back to the earth, still humming, alive. It no longer needed hands to guide it. It sang on its own, weaving new stories where old ones had ended. Kjell picked it up with trembling fingers. It's her, he said softly. She is the song now. Air smiled through her tears. And the world will hum forever because it remembers her voice. Above them, the constellations shifted once more, forming a new pattern that pulsed like a heart. Its name was not written in any tongue, but the melody was unmistakable. It was the sound of Liv, the seamstress who taught the sky to sing. The horizon burned before they even reached it. Where Niflheim had been still and silver, Muspelheim rose in a storm of motion, flame and ash twisting through the air like serpents of light. The heat did not destroy, it sculpted. Every gust reshaped the ground into molten glass. Every breath shimmered with the ghosts of suns that had never set. Air's robe smoldered at the edges, yet she didn't flinch. Kjell, the old smith reborn as peace, felt a familiar hum of fire under his skin and exhaled as though greeting an old friend. But it was Liv's golden thread that led them forward, glowing brighter in this realm than in any light they had known. It's pulling us toward the heart, she murmured. Air nodded. The place where creation never rests. The forge of what cannot fade. The flames parted before them as they approached. Beneath a mountain that seemed to breathe fire stood a structure vast as the sky, shaped not by hand but by intention. The air rang with hammer strikes. Deep, patient, eternal. Sparks fell like stars being born. And at the center of that impossible forge stood a figure made entirely of flame. He was neither man nor god, neither demon nor element. His form shifted with every heartbeat. Sometimes a towering giant of cinders, sometimes a slender artisan whose body glowed like the edge of a sunbeam, yet his eyes remained constant. Two burning coals that saw everything and judged nothing. You've come far to seek what endures, he said, voice like iron cooling in water. You carry the song that unmade endings. Liv stepped forward. The thread coiled around her wrist. You know what this is. I made what it was once part of, the smith replied. When the first fire breathed life into the world, I tempered its light into a chord, a bridge between will and becoming. The god stole it, calling it the loom's heart. You've brought it home. He extended a hand of pure flame, and the golden thread leapt from Liv's palm into his grasp as if recognizing its maker. Sparks cascaded down his arm, scattering into molten dust that sang faintly before cooling into starlight on the ground. It's strong, he murmured, but it still carries a memory of sorrow. You would have it endure eternity? Then it must forget the warmth of mercy and learn the patience of suns. Air frowned. If it forgets mercy, it will become divine but not alive. The smith's eyes narrowed. Twin furnaces in the gloom. Then it must be tempered not by flame alone. He turned to Kjell. You, son of earth and iron. Your hammer remembers destruction. Your heart remembers forgiveness. Strike it once, and it will carry both. Kjell stepped forward without hesitation. The smith placed a golden thread upon the anvil, an enormous slab of obsidian veined with light. The thread pulsed faintly, its hum rising like breath drawn in anticipation. Ready, said Kjell. The smith nodded and struck his own hammer first. The blow was like thunder turned solid, a sound that shook the realm. Flame burst outward, wrapping the thread in fire so pure it turned white. Then Kjell raised his hammer and brought it down. The moment of impact froze time. The world went silent except for the heartbeat of the forge itself. The thread absorbed the blow, glowing so fiercely that even the flames around them dimmed. When the light receded, it had changed. No longer merely gold. It now shimmered with layers of color, crimson, silver, and the deep black of cooled iron beneath the sheen of light. It was alive, yes, but not fragile. It was endurance made visible, mercy made unbreakable. The smith lifted it reverently. Now it will never fray, he said, but its strength must be sung into it. He turned to Liv. You are its voice. Let the song you carry fill the fire. Liv closed her eyes. The melody of the Norn still lived in her chest, faint but eternal. She began to hum, and the note resonated through the forge, not loud, but deep, the kind of sound that held weight. The flames around them changed color, deepening from orange to violet, then to white, so bright it seemed to erase shadow itself. The smith smiled. So even endings sing now. Air's staff trembled in her hand. She's binding the thread to the forge itself. As Liv sang, the thread rose into the air, uncoiling above the anvil. It shimmered with symbols, runes forming and dissolving, each one a word for endurance in a language older than the stars. The fire gathered around it, folding inward until it met the thread center, and the sound it made was like a sigh of infinite release. Then silence. The smith reached forward and caught the thread as it drifted down, now cool to the touch, though it still glowed softly. He handed it back to Liv. It will outlast the worlds, he said. Even the gods will fade before it does. But remember, endurance without memory becomes stone. Sing often or it will sleep. Liv took the thread in both hands. It pulsed once, matching the beat of her heart. I'll keep it awake, she promised. The smith of flame bowed his head. Then the dawn no longer needs a sun. As they left the forge, the fires dimmed behind them, folding into quiet embers. Yet the light never fully faded. It lingered in the air around Liv, the hum of tempered eternity woven into her every breath. Kjell looked at her and smiled. You've made the fire remember kindness. Liv glanced back toward the fading glow. No, she said softly. It remembered itself. And as they stepped into the cooling air beyond Muspelheim, the first light of a sunless dawn rose behind them, a radiance that cast no shadow, shining from within all things that still dared to endure. The sky did not break this time. It unwove itself. It began as a shimmer, a faint loosening in the distance, as though the light of dawn had grown tired of holding form. The air trembled, and Liv looked up just as the heavens bent in two. The stars stuttered. The constellations she had sewn began to slip their seams, threads of fire unraveling across the vault of night. A second tear opened, slower than the first, but deeper, deliberate, vast. Through it poured not darkness, but movement. Spirals of light twisting into nothing, whole fragment of reality folding inward like fabric being unstitched from both sides. Air gasped. No! The sky is remembering its own beginning. The ground beneath them shuddered, and from its roots rose a sound older than thunder, the groan of Yggdrasil itself. The world tree's branches, once invisible above the firmament, now burned through the air, their vast silhouettes flickering in and out of sight. Each leaf blazed with a life's destiny, glowing and then dimming, glowing and dimming, as if unsure whether to continue existing. Kjell staggered, gripping his hammer for balance. The roots are shaking. Every world is feeling this. Liv stared at the unraveling heavens. The eternal thread pulsed in her hand. Not with calm, not with music, but with terror. It strained, pulling toward the rip, as if desperate to be used again. Air's voice was hoarse. Liv, stop it. Don't sew again. The first mending held the world together, but this would alter them. Liv's eyes filled with starlight, her hair lifting in the surge of energy pouring from the tear. If I don't, everything will come undone. Air stepped forward. And if you do, everything will change. The air thickened, rippling with unseen currents. Images flashed within the widening tear. Glimpses of lives not yet lived, wars that had not yet begun. Children unborn and gods undone. Each thread of the sky was a life, a promise, a choice, and all of them trembled now at her fingertips. The Norn song returned, distant but audible, braided through the chaos. We made the first pattern, child. You choose the next. Liv looked down at her hands. The golden thread had turned white-hot, the runes of endurance flickering like living fire. The melody within it had grown into a chorus. Millions of voices, each one echoing a destiny that might have been. Kjell's voice broke through the roar. Liv, if you pull that thread, every fate changes, even ours. She met his eyes. It already has. Above them, one of Yggdrasil's great roots split open, light pouring from the wound. From within it came the murmur of lives reshuffling, the sound of 1,000 choices rewriting themselves. Births delayed, deaths undone, loves meeting a century too soon or too late. The whole of existence shivered like a harp string plucked by an unseen hand. Liv raised a thread, and the heavens bent toward her. The tear widened, spilling radiance, so bright it erased all boundaries. Sky, ground, memory. She saw it then, clearer than she had ever seen anything. The weave of all worlds, the lattice of meaning itself, not fixed but alive. Every time she had stitched a seam, the pattern had changed, not healed, but evolved. She understood the truth with sudden clarity. Mending was never about restoration. It was about choice. To repair the sky meant to rewrite everything that had ever depended on it. The thread trembled in her hand, waiting. Air fell to her knees, tears streaming from her sightless eyes. Liv, listen. You don't have to carry what the gods abandoned. Let it break. Let the tree remember what it was without you. But the golden light wrapped around Liv's fingers, insistent, pleading. She felt it in her bones. The pain of the unmade, the yearning of the almost born, the confusion of stars with no constellations to belong to. The world wasn't asking to be saved. It was asking to continue. She looked back once at Kjell, whose face was lit by the trembling fire of the sky. If I do this, she said softly, we won't be who we were. He smiled to the tremor of light. Then let the new world remember us kindly. And with that, Liv cast the thread upward. The sky caught fire. The tear twisted upon itself, its edges fusing in spirals of molten light. The constellations fell like rain, then rose again, reordering into new shapes. The hum of fate became a song too vast a sound, echoing through Yggdrasil's roots until even the tree bowed under its weight. Every branch of existence realigned. Some worlds vanished. Others bloomed from the ash of forgotten possibilities. The tear closed, but not neatly. It seemed shimmer with colors no eye had seen, no tongue could name. The world stilled. The air trembled with new laws of being. Liv collapsed to her knees, her hands smoking from the brilliance. The thread hung limp from her fingers, dim but whole. She could feel it now, the hum of countless destinies rewritten through her act. The gods above no longer watched. They listened. Air touched her shoulder. What have you done? Liv looked up at the new sky, vast, strange, alive. The constellations no longer told stories of gods or heroes, but of ordinary souls. A farmer's hand, a child's laughter, the pattern of breath in sleep. I didn't mend it, she whispered. I gave it choice. Yggdrasil's branches trembled one last time, then grew still. A slow wind moved through the leaves, carrying a new sound, the faint, steady rhythm of the world learning how to begin again. It began as a whisper under the skin of the worlds, a pulse that ran backward to the new constellations, dimming their glow one by one. At first Liv thought it was the aftershock of what she had done, the weave shifting into balance. But then the light began to flicker in rhythm, not with her heartbeat, but with another's. Air was the first to understand. She felt in the staff she carried, the hum that was not harmony but challenge. "Someone is weaving against you," she murmured. From a horizon came a black shimmer, the air rippling as if it were cloth being turned inside out. Out of it stepped Ska, no longer cloaked only in shadow but in movement itself. Her presence bent reality, each stride undoing distance, each breath unraveling color. Behind her came figures that seemed both human and not. Followers woven from the discarded threads of worlds that had vanished when Liv closed a second tear. They were beautiful in the way storms are beautiful, fluid, merciless, necessary. Some carried looms made of bone, others wielded needles glowing with void light. Their eyes shone with cold reverence for their mistress. Ska stopped before Liv, her form pulsing like ink beneath ice. "Little sister," she said, voice rippling through the air. "You stitched life where silence belonged. You bound endings to beginnings, denying the cosmos its right to rest." Liv stepped forward, her own thread coiling around her wrist, now glimmering faintly like morning frost. "I gave it choice." "Choice is cruelty when it denies release," Ska replied. "The world is a tapestry stretched too thin. Look around you, new destinies that do not fit the pattern, lives that ache because they were never meant to be. I would let it collapse, and in the collapse, everything would be clean again." The followers murmured in unison, their voices like the sound of cloth tearing. Kjell's hand went to his hammer, though it was no longer a weapon, but a memory of one. "You destroy all this just to start over?" "To start true," said Ska. "To let creation learn how to die properly." She lifted her hand, and the air split open behind her, revealing a vast expanse of darkness threaded with red light. Another loom, ancient and patient, waiting. This was the first loom, the one that spun the void before even fire remembered itself. "It obeys only me now." The world trembled. Yggdrasil's branches bent, shedding leaves that burned to ash before touching the ground. Stars began to fall again, this time not as light, but as ash, gray and silent. Air raised her staff. "Ska, listen. The balance is new, yes, but it's alive. Endings are still honored. You're not forgotten." The Shadow Weaver's face softened, but only for a moment. "Forgotten? I am remembered too late. You let mortals decide how long to linger, how often to love, how many times to return. But every heartbeat stolen from oblivion is a thread I must bear. I am drowning in their unfinished songs." Liv's voice shook. "Then let me carry them." Ska's gaze darkened. "You already have. That's why you hear me now." The followers began to move, forming a circle, their looms spinning threads of unlight that crept across the ground toward Liv's feet. Wherever they touched, the new constellations above flickered and vanished. Kjell stepped forward, slamming his hammer into the earth. The shockwave shattered the advancing threads. "You'll have to unmake us first." Ska smiled. "Gladly." The sky erupted. Threads of shadow lashed downward, meeting Liv's golden weave midair. The impact thunder crossed the heavens, light and darkness twining, twisting, sparking into shapes that resembled wings, faces, and forgotten runes. The cosmos itself became a battlefield of looms. Every stitch Liv had ever made came alive again. Rivers bent upward to defend her. Stars exploded into radiant shields. The constellation she'd sown of unborn souls descended, singing their silent light into the fight. Ska moved through them like a blade through silk. Her followers wove darkness faster than light could answer, creating voids in the fabric of reality that pulled at the edges of existence. Liv threw her needle forward. "You taught me endings," she cried, "but you never taught me what happens when endings forgive themselves." The thread of endurance ignited. It didn't burn, it sang. Every song the Norns had given her, every hum of fate, every cry of a mortal who refused to vanish poured into its light. The sound rippled through the stars, through Yggdrasil's roots, through the hearts of gods that no longer existed. Ska staggered, her shadows faltering. Her followers froze mid-motion, their looms unraveling into dust. For a moment, only their hum remained. the faint echo of what might have been mercy. Liv stepped toward her. The golden thread stretched between them like a bridge. "You don't have to end everything," she said softly. "You only have to stop carrying alone." Skaya's form wavered. The void behind her pulsed. "If I stop, what will I be?" "Still," Liv said, and in stillness remembered. The last light of the War Weavers was not an explosion, but a single stitch drawn through shadow and flame. The tear in the sky closed, not by force but by agreement. The darkness folded itself into the light, like a breath returning home. When the silence settled, there was no victory, only equilibrium. Ska knelt, her cloak no longer black but gray, her edges softening. Her followers had become motes of dust drifting toward the stars. She looked up at Liv. "Then let it endure," she whispered. "But never forget who taught you to end." Liv nodded. "I won't." The thread glowed once more, sealing the last rip in the heavens. And for the first time in all the ages, creation sighed not in fear or longing, but in rest. It began with a sound that was not sound, a vibration deeper than thought, older than language. The world had quieted after the War of Weavers. Stars floated in balance again. Yggdrasil's branches glowed faintly with the breath of peace, and Liv's golden thread hummed like a lullaby. Yet beneath that peace, something moved. Not an enemy, not even anger, resistance. Fate itself had begun to pull away. When Liv lifted her needle to sew the final seam, the place where light and shadow had once collided, the air resisted. The needle quivered in her grasp, its tip glowing not with gold, but with a deep, bruised crimson. It vibrated harder the more she tried to steady it, like a memory refusing to be rewritten. Air's voice came from behind her, trembling. "It remembers." Liv frowned. "Remembers what?" "The first wound," Air said softly. "The one that birthed creation. Blood was the first ink that fate ever used." The ground shuddered. The stars overhead rippled, as if caught in a current. The needle in Liv's hand twisted, the metal singing with an anguish that felt alive. She dropped it instinctively, and it struck the ground point first. But instead of piercing the soil, it rooted, sinking deep until only its hilt remained visible. Then it grew. The hum became a roar, and the golden shape elongated, widening, darkening, becoming a spear of starlight and bloodlight intertwined. Runes flared across its shaft, not of her making, not of the Norns. These were older Rar, carved by the act of existence itself. The words of becoming, the grammar of inevitability. Kjell took a step forward, his expression caught between awe and fear. "It's rejecting you." Liv stared at the weapon as it pulsed with light. "No, it's remembering what it was before it mended anything." The spear lifted from the ground and hovered upright, its point aimed toward the sky. The clouds above churned in spirals around it, streaked red by the light of the runes. The air filled with a sound like 1,000 whispered promises being broken at once. Air raised her staff. "Liv, step back. That's not your tool anymore. That's fate defending itself." Liv didn't move. "It's alive. It knows what I've done, how many threads I've moved, how many endings I've stolen. It's trying to put them back." The spear thrummed, and in its light she saw flickers, scenes unraveling. The unborn souls she had turned into stars now flickered like candles in wind. The Frost King's rivers of mercy began to freeze again. The constellations of forgiveness she'd sown in the heavens trembled as if uncertain they deserved to exist. Kjell's voice cracked. "It's rewriting your mercy into law." Liv's eyes filled with light. "Then it's not fate, it's fear. It doesn't want to change again." She reached toward the spear. The moment her fingers brushed it, the light engulfed her. The spear sang, not in words, but in memory. She felt blood again, not hers, but the blood of the first gods, spilled when they cut the pattern of time into being. That blood had hardened into rules, into destiny, into the cold structure that even the Norns could not defy. Now that blood was flowing again. The spear's runes blazed brighter. One of them spoke inside her mind, all mending demands another tear. Liv gritted her teeth, her hand still pressed to the shaft. "Then tear me." The weapon flared, and she screamed, not from pain, but from remembrance. Every stitch she had made came alive again inside her. Every cry she comforted, Every death she'd softened, every choice she'd altered, they spun around her like ribbons of light and shadow, wrapping her body, her heart, her voice. The spear absorbed them, drinking her memory, her compassion, her defiance. Kiel ran toward her, shouting, but air caught his arm. No, she's bargaining with it. Liv's voice came to the storm of light, trembling, fierce. If fate wants blood, it can take mine, but it will remember why it flowed. The runes dimmed, their glow softening from red to gold. The spear stopped trembling. The storm above it stilled. Slowly, the weapon bent in Liv's grasp, no longer resisting but listening. Its edge softened, its shaft curved. The spear became slender again, its point dulling to the gentleness of a needle. The runes remained, but their light pulsed in time with Liv's heartbeat. The bloodlight faded, leaving only the steady warmth of dawn. Air approached her carefully. "Liv, what did you do?" Liv opened her palm. The needle rested there, heavier than before, streaked faintly with crimson that glowed from within. Not blood, but memory. "I didn't fight fate," she whispered. "I reminded it that destiny bleeds too." Kiel exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Then the sky is safe again?" Liv looked up. The stars above had stopped unraveling. Yet they shone differently now, softer, imperfect, their patterns slightly askew. The constellations no longer looked like maps. They looked like scars. "Safe?" she murmured. "No, but alive." As they stood beneath the renewed heavens, the needle hummed once more, low and steady. Not the hum of command, nor the harmony of creation, but a heartbeat echoing across eternity. A reminder that even fate, if it means to endure, must sometimes remember its own blood. It began as a trembling beneath silence, a vibration so deep that even Yggdrasil shuddered in response. At first, Liv thought it was a lingering hum of her needle, still streaked with the faint red light of fate's remembered blood. But then she felt it in her bones, a resonance too vast to belong to any single realm. It came from everywhere at once, from frost and flame, from root and sky. Each world had begun to sing. The sound rose like mist, without words but thick with meaning. In Nibelheim, the frozen river sighed in long, aching tones, the echo of mercy that had once melted the Frost King's heart. In Muspelheim, the fires of the forge of sunless dawn crackled into rhythm, their sparks bursting into the air like drums. Alfheim answered in silver harmonies, light itself turning into melody as it curved through crystal forests. From Midgard came the sound of mortal breath, billions of hearts sinking for a single instant. From Hel, a low hum of peace, the sound of souls who had stopped screaming and learned to rest. From Jotunheim, the slow, rumbling chant of mountains remembering when they were young. And from the dark roots below, the serpents and nidhogg's brood hissed in rhythm, their tones wrapping the song in shadows. Even Asgard, fractured and forgotten, joined, its echo thin, fragile, but proud. Liv stood at the center of the convergence, upon the plain where once the tears in the sky had opened. The air around her shimmered with threads of light, each one vibrating in time with a different tone. She could see them now, sound made visible. Waves of color rippled through the air, folding and unfolding into patterns that pulsed like wings. Air stood beside her, her blind eyes wet with tears. "Every realm remembers its own sorrow," she whispered. "They're singing themselves whole." Kiel knelt, pressing his ear to the trembling ground. And the roots, they're carrying the song through Yggdrasil itself. The tree is resonating. It's binding them together. Liv raised her hand, and the golden thread lifted with it, drawn upward as if pulled by the melody. It vibrated so intensely that it blurred into pure light, a single shining line stretching from her heart to the heavens. For a moment she could hear everything. Every death, every rebirth, every story ever told by wind, stone, or flame. The sound was not beautiful. It was raw, discordant, magnificent. The music of imperfection, of existence daring to be unfinished. The Norns' voices drifted through it like ghosts. Every realm must sing its own lament before harmony can begin. Liv understood then. Her task had never been to silence sorrow or erase fracture, but to weave them into one another, to turn the grief of the worlds into the pulse that kept them alive. She touched the thread, and it responded instantly, glowing white-hot, its hum matching the pitch of the Nine-Realm song. The needle in her other hand began to shine, trembling with the effort of holding so much sound within so small a body. Air took a step forward, awestruck. "What are you doing?" Liv's voice was soft, steady. "Tuning the cosmos." She raised a needle and pressed it through the vibrating thread. The moment the point pierced light, the world gasped. The song exploded. Color surged through the air, not merely light, but sound turned radiant. The 9 melodies collided, harmonized, and fused into one pulse that rippled outward through every plane. Fjords glowed with auroras that hummed like choirs. Mountains rang like bells. Rivers became flutes of liquid glass. The wind itself learned to carry rhythm. The roots of Yggdrasil throbbed with a golden heartbeat. Liv's body trembled as a resonance filled her, lifting her feet from the ground. The golden thread now spanned all of creation, shimmering like a bridge between all worlds. The lament of each realm folded into the next, Niflheim's sigh becoming Muspelheim's rhythm, Midgard's heart becoming Asgard's echo, until sorrow and joy were indistinguishable. Kjell shielded his eyes from the radiance. "She's binding them through song." Air's voice trembled. "Not binding, listening. She's letting them hear one another." The hum deepened. The light spread outward, folding space and time like cloth being pressed flat. Liv's voice joined the chorus now, clear, fragile, utterly human. She sang no words, only the melody of breath, and the sound was enough. The realms answered her. The skies brightened. The seas steadied. The flames of Muspelheim gentled, warming instead of burning. The ice of Niflheim glittered with veins of light that pulsed to the rhythm of her song. Even Hel, the quietest of all, shone with a tranquil glow, as if smiling. The vibration built and built until it became indistinguishable from heartbeat. Not hers alone, not the trees, but everything's. When it finally faded, there was no silence, only calm. The thread hung motionless in the air, its light diffused, warm, steady. The realms had not merged, nor had they separated. They simply breathed together. Liv lowered her hand, exhausted but radiant. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. Air nodded, her face glowing with tears. "The world is alive again." Kjell smiled faintly, listening to the faint hum that lingered in the air like a promise. And it finally knows its own song. Above them, the constellations shifted one last time, forming not gods or weapons, but vast, glowing heart whose pulse spanned all creation. Its rhythm was slow, endless, patient. The sound of all 9 realms remembering they were one body, one melody, one breath. And at its center, the thread glowed softly, humming the name of the seamstress who had taught eternity how to sing. The night sky was still singing when Air felt her heart begin to slow. The great hum of the 9 realms still pulsed through the roots of Yggdrasil. The song Liv had awakened resonating in every corner of existence. Yet amid that living harmony, a silence had begun to form, soft, patient, absolute, and Air knew it was calling for her. She stood upon the plain where the sky had been torn and mended, her staff glowing faintly in the reflected light, 1,000 new constellations. Her body trembled, but her mind was still, the kind of stillness that only comes when duty has already decided what must be done. "Liv," she said quietly. "The song needs one last note." Liv turned toward her, the golden thread shimmered between her fingers, alive with every tone of the 9 realms. "It's complete," she whispered. "The world is whole." Air shook her head. "Not yet. The seam holds, but it doesn't see. It needs direction. Without sight, the thread will wander, and so will every destiny bound to it." Kjell frowned. "Then let me do it." "Let me?" She smiled. "You've already reforged the world's heart, blacksmith. It needs a guide, not a guardian." She lifted her staff, and for the first time in centuries, her eyes opened. They were not white anymore. They burned with 1,000 colors, the auroras of Niflheim, the fires of Muspelheim, the green pulse of Midgard, the gold of Asgard's ruins. Every world lived in that gaze. The sight flooded her with light, so fierce it cut through her body like wind through glass. "This was the gift the Norns took from me," she said softly. Blindness, so that I would learn to feel what others saw. But now the worlds need vision, not touch. Liv's voice trembled. Air, you don't have to. I do. She turned her face to the heavens. The constellations wavered, waiting, expectant. The thread in Liv's hand began to tremble, drawn toward the Valkyrie's light. Once, Air said, her voice carrying like him, I led the dead to where their stories ended. Tonight, I'll lead the stars to where they belong. She lifted her staff high, and the light within her eyes surged outward. The heavens shone brighter, blurring the line between starlight and soul. Her vision, her final vision, unfolded across the sky. To Liv, it looked like a map of all things. Every realm, every soul, every moment stitched into one sweeping pattern that pulsed like a single heartbeat. The stars realigned, following the path drawn from Air's gaze, a final seam stretching from horizon to horizon. Liv raised a needle. Guide me. Air nodded, her voice barely a whisper now. Across the dark, from memory to mercy. The needle moved, and Air's light followed it, the staff glowing until it dissolved in her hands. She walked forward, each step leaving behind trails of light that wound upward into the sky, her form blurred, her armor turning to dust, her body thinning into radiance. When the final stitch was made, the constellations flared, not as war, not as prophecy, but as forgiveness. The hum of the 9 realms softened into stillness. Liv lowered the needle, tears glimmering down her cheeks. Air stood at the center of the new firmament, her outline dissolving among the stars. The blind see best, she whispered, when there's nothing left to forgive. And then she was gone, her light stretching across the heavens, forming a single radiant thread that crossed every constellation, binding them together. It pulsed once, a heartbeat vast enough to echo through eternity. Liv bowed her head. Goodbye, Valkyrie. Kiel placed a hand on her shoulder. No, he said softly. Look. In the sky, a new constellation shimmered. A woman with outstretched wings, her eyes closed, her staff held high. The stars around her flickered in rhythm with the world's heartbeat, each pulse a memory of her sacrifice. The song resumed, quieter, deeper, and at its center, the steady note of her soul. The final scene glowed across the night, perfect and alive, a horizon made of mercy, a scar that sang. The forge waited for him, not in Muspelheim this time, but in the heart of Yggdrasil itself, where flame and root met in endless twilight. The song of the 9 realms still echoed through the air, faint now, steady as breath. Above, Air's final constellation glowed across the night sky, her light weaving the realms into one vast, patient tapestry. The world was whole, but it trembled at the edges, too new, too pure. It needed something the gods had never known. It needed to remember how to break. Kiel stood before the loom, his hammer slung across his back, his arms bare to the golden heat that pulsed in the machine's living heart. The threads of existence shimmered across it, strands of flame and frost, of time and shadow, each one humming softly. Liv's needle rested nearby, its light dim but alive, whispering the memory of her voice. Air's voice still echoed somewhere within him. Every ending must choose its weight. He placed a hand over his chest. With a forged fire of his own heart beat steady and mortal. He had lived through creation and collapse, through peace and penance. He had reforged every weapon that had ever hurt him, even himself. There was nothing left to shape except what could outlast gods. He smiled. Then let them learn what only we knew, the beauty of not lasting forever. He stepped into forge. The flames didn't burn. They remembered. They licked across his skin like recognition, melting armor and bone into light. His breath came slower, his pulse louder. When he lifted his hammer one final time, it no longer struck metal, but meaning. Each blow sent ripples through the loom, changing its rhythm, softening its perfection. He forged flaws into eternity. The threads began to twist and fray, not to weaken, but to breathe. Cracks appeared where none had existed, spaces where chaos and choice could slip through. Every spark from the forge became a heartbeat somewhere, in a tree, in a storm, in a newborn cry. The god's old pattern, flawless, unyielding, bent and warmed under his hands. Molten light poured from his chest, his heart unspooling into the loom. The blood of man, not a god, flowed into creation. He laughed through tears. "Let the gods learn imperfection," he said, his voice steady, even as his form began to dissolve. "Let them remember what it means to fail, and still love the trying." The loom answered him with light, not blinding, but golden and kind. The thread of eternity absorbed the pulse of his heart and began to beat with it. Every world shivered, then steadied. Mountain sighed. Rivers changed their course. Stars blinked with new, gentler regularities. The universe finally learning to exhale. As the forge dimmed, his hammer fell silently into the dust. Liv's needle, resting nearby, caught a faint echo of his laughter. It hummed once, bright and warm, and then the forge went dark. When the light faded, the loom stood glowing softly, its threads now woven with small imperfections, knots, loops, and tiny scars of gold. They gleamed like fingerprints on divine skin. From that day onward, even gods grew weary, and in their weariness, they learned compassion. And somewhere deep in the heart of the tree, where the forge once burned, there was still a faint heartbeat, the echo of a blacksmith who had taught eternity to be human. When the final seam was drawn, the sky fell silent. Liv stood alone beneath the heavens. The golden thread now fused into the firmament itself. Her hand trembled, but her work was complete. The wound that had once split eternity was sealed. The stars began to return, faint at first, then brightening with a cautious shimmer, as though waking from a long sleep. Air's constellation still shone at the horizon, her wings forever open. Kiel's pulse still echoed faintly in the roots below, the heartbeat of a world that had learned imperfection. Everything was mended, or so it seemed, because when Liv looked up, the constellations were wrong. The familiar figures, the wolf, the serpent, the Valkyrie, the forge, were gone. The stars had rearranged themselves into new shapes, new symbols, patterns that no god had ever named. The heavens glowed with a language no one had written. She stepped backward, whispering, "No, this isn't what I sowed." Air's voice, faint eternal, drifted from the starlight above. Every mender changes the story she restores. Liv's breath caught. The constellations moved again, subtly, a ripple passing across the sky like thought through water. They began to pulse, not with divine rhythm, but with something close to the heartbeat, to breath. Each shimmer carried whispers in unfamiliar tongues. Laughter, mourning, promises, prayers. The sky had begun to dream. Kiel's forge light flared deep beneath the soil, answering. The heartbeat of the world quickened, sinking with a strange new pulse above. The stars flickered in response. And for the first time, they told stories of mortals. Not gods warring, nor monsters chained, but children sleeping beside rivers. Lovers saying farewell. Hands building, breaking, mending again. Every story, a small imperfect echo of the divine, made sacred simply by being incomplete. Liv fell to her knees, overwhelmed. "They're rewriting the myths," she whispered. The voice of the Norns whispered through the constellations. "You gave creation a choice. Now it chooses its own stories." The stars glowed brighter, their lines shifting until they no longer formed any fixed figures at all. The heavens now moved like a great loom weaving and unweaving itself in real time. Every heartbeat, a new story. Every breath, a new constellation. Liv's golden needle still hummed faintly in her hand, but it no longer obeyed her. It trembled, responding instead to the voices of countless worlds below, millions of songs, prayers, and griefs being sung upward. The thread in the sky brightened with every human whisper, every creature's dream. And she realized the truth with quiet terror and wonder. She hadn't mended the sky wrong. She had made it free. The order the gods had once imposed was gone. The heavens no longer dictated fate. They reflected it. The constellations would shift forever now, mirroring every soul's motion, every act of love or cruelty, every hope that dared to outlive its moment. Air's voice faded into wind. The stars no longer remember the gods. They remember you. Liv looked up at the endless, restless firmament and smiled through her tears. The sky was imperfect, unruly, alive, and as its light spilled across the 9 realms, the world exhaled, no longer bound by destiny, but held together by the endless, ever-changing stories that would never stop being written. The wind rose like a tide that had forgotten the sea. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, curling to the roots of Yggdrasil, whispering over the silver plains, stirring the stars in their new, untamed constellations. Liv felt it before she heard it, a tremor that moved through the thread in her hands, through her bones, through the fabric of the sky itself. Then came the voices. Three, rising together, distinct yet indivisible, child of the terror, singer of endings, weaver of change. The air around her shimmered, and light broke through it as though the wind itself had become translucent fabric. Within the folds of that brightness, three shapes emerged, not bodies, but presences made of memory and radiance. The Norns, but they were not as Liv remembered them. Once, they had been serene and infinite, seated beside their loom, faces veiled and calm. Now they stood proud but hollow-eyed, their beauty cracked by sorrow. Their light strained to the seams of the very cosmos she had remade. They shone like sun through worn linen, radiant, but mortal in their fragility. Liv fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the hum of their return. "You came back," she whispered. "I thought you had unraveled." Their voices wove together, the wind carrying their words in threads of light. "We did, and through your hands, we remembered ourselves." The first, Verdandi, who had once measured the present, looked at Liv with eyes of molten silver. "You did not fix what was broken." The second, Ord, keeper what had been, spoke with the weight of rivers. "You changed it." The third, Skuld, who had lived in every possible tomorrow, smiled, though her gaze trembled with ache. "And now, even we are part of what comes next." Liv rose slowly, the golden thread glowing faintly around her wrists. "I only wanted to mend what the gods abandoned." Verdandi's expression softened. "And in doing so, you did what they never could. You made the world capable of remembering itself." "But it's wrong," Liv said. She looked to the sky, where constellations still shifted like restless dreams. "It doesn't obey any pattern. The stories keep changing." Ord raised a hand, and the stars above them pulsed once, gently, in acknowledgement. "Then it is alive." The wind quieted, heavy with unspoken truth. The three lights began to circle her, their movements deliberate, weaving invisible spirals of brilliance. Each step they took left faint runes in the air, letters not prophecy, but of gratitude. "You ended the age of order," said Skuld. "The threads will no longer bind. The worlds will no longer fear ending." Verdandi's light brightened. "But you also gave us what even we could not conceive, choice." "And choice," Ord said, "is creation's cruelest mercy." Liv's throat tightened. "Then I've doomed us." The Norn's light pulsed in unison, enveloping her. "No," they said together, their voices vibrating through every plane of being. "You have freed us. Even gods must now learn humility." The golden thread lifted from Liv's hand and rose into the air between them, stretching upward until it connected sky and root, flame and frost, life and afterlife. It pulsed once, not with divine rhythm, but with the uneven beat of a mortal heart. Verdandi placed her hand upon it. "You have turned fate into breath." Skuld placed hers atop it, and breath into memory. Ord laid hers last. But all memory fades, and that, too, is grace. The three stepped back, their light dimming into gentler hues. The wind began to disperse, unraveling their shapes into the air once more. Liv reached toward them, her voice breaking. "Will I see you again?" Their answer came like the last sigh of a star. "You will not need to. We are the wind in every thread you mend. We are what listens when the world hums." And then they were gone, the light scattering like dust across a new dawn. Liv stood beneath the living sky, the constellations shifting above her in endless, evolving stories. The thread in her hand still vibrated with their parting words. She looked up, eyes filled with tears and wonder. "I didn't fix it," she whispered. "I changed it." And the wind, gentle and infinite, whispered back through the starlight. "Exactly." The dawn arrived without light, only warmth. It spread to the air like breath, tender and slow, touching the edges of every realm that still dared to exist. The roots of Yggdrasil pulsed faintly beneath the soil, carrying the echo of the Norn's final words. The stars above turned lazily, unhurried now, whispering their new stories to one another in quiet, shifting constellations. And at the center of it all stood Liv. The golden thread, once a weapon, then a hymn, then a bridge between worlds, now lay slack across her palms. Its glow had softened from fire to heartbeat. When she lifted it toward the morning horizon, it no longer hummed. It sighed. Kjell was gone, melted into the forge that had become the world's new heart. Air was a constellation. The seam across the heavens had shone where compassion met sacrifice. The Norns had dissolved into wind, their voices forever entangled in the hum of living things. Only Liv remained, mortal, imperfect, trembling beneath the weight of all she had unmade and remade. The thread trembled once more in her hands, not in rebellion, but in peace, as though it, too, had grown weary of being divine. She whispered, "You've done enough." The thread pulsed once, then unraveled into light. The glow poured across her skin, soft as touch, and coiled around her shoulders, her arms, her hair. Each strand shimmered as it settled, weaving itself gently into her being. When it was done, her hair gleamed with the faintest gold, the color of mercy remembered. She reached up instinctively, and her fingers came away glowing faintly. The thread was gone from her grasp. It was within her now, a warm bloom beneath her ribs, spreading outward like dawn finding form. She felt it in her pulse, the hum of rivers in Midgard, the flicker of flame in Muspelheim, the frost of Nibelheim breathing in rhythm with her lungs. Her heartbeat aligned with the world's, uneven but steady, alive. For a moment, she wept, not from grief, but from awe. She could hear everything. The song of the stars adjusting to their new stories, the whisper of trees remembering the names of rain, the laughter of children not yet born. All of it was thread, her thread, moving to the world, weaving itself not into perfection, but into continuance. The wind stirred around her, carrying the faint echo of the Norn's departing words. Every weaver must one day become the cloth. Liv smiled through her tears. Then let me be the seam that remembers. She stepped forward, barefoot on the living ground. Wherever she walked, light followed, not blinding, not holy, but warm. Flowers rose through frost. Stones softened. The roots beneath the earth shifted, recognizing her steps as part of their own rhythm. And above her, the skies shimmered once, its constellations flickering, then rearranged themselves in quiet tribute. A figure of light, seated at a loom, her hair streaming outward into the stars. Liv looked up, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm still here." The wind answered gently, "You are the memory that learns." And so she understood. The gods had ended. The Norns had passed into their own song. But the world still needed a seamstress, not to rule, not to repair, but to remember. From that day forward, the sky no longer waited for prophecy. It breathed with her. New stories, new endings, new beginnings, woven into every dawn and every dusk. And when the wind moved across the 9 realms, carrying its low, patient hum, every being who heard it, mortal or spirit, would feel it stir something deep inside and wonder. Was that the sound of the world itself healing? No, it was the sound of Liv, the thread that forgave itself, still sewing the sky, one heartbeat at a time. The dawn did not rise. It stitched itself together. The first light crept across the horizon like thread through torn fabric, drawing warmth into the seams of night. Clouds unfolded like open palms between them. The stars pulsed, not fading, but repairing, each one flaring and dimming as though pulling its own edge taut. Liv stood beneath the living sky, barefoot on the plain where all worlds met. Her hair, streaked with gold, shimmered faintly in the breeze, the last remnant of thread that had once bound gods, ghosts, and time itself. Now the world no longer needed her hands. It had learned her lesson. It was mending itself. The constellations rippled and reformed. She saw fragments of what had been. Air's wings, Kjell's forge, the river that once ran backward, but they did not stay. They shifted into shapes she did not know, stories that no mortal or god had ever spoken. The heavens were writing without her. For the first time in all her lives, She felt no fear in that. A slow wind moved through the air, and the song of the 9 realms returned, fainter now, transformed. It was not a hymn of obedience or destiny, but the steady pulse of imperfection breathing. Every realm sang its own note, uneven, flawed, alive, and the sound rose into harmony so vast it made the stars themselves tremble. She tilted her head back and listened. The voices of the gods had gone quiet. Odin's storms, Loki's laughter, Hel's sorrow, all stilled, humbled by the sight of creation repairing itself without their will. They watched as their constellations dissolved into patterns too fluid to name. They were no longer myths but memories. The gods were witnesses now, nothing more. Liv felt the hum of the earth rising through her feet, through her veins. She closed her eyes, and in that rhythm, she heard the loom of the world turning, slow, eternal, patient. Every being was a thread now, weaving itself toward meaning. Above her, the stars pulsed faster. The rhythm of a heartbeat multiplied across infinity. Threads of light crossed the heavens in arcs and spirals, a million needles drawing time together, unmaking and remaking the same line endlessly. The sky was healing itself. And then, as the first full light of dawn broke, the final seam appeared, a thin line of fire arcing across the heavens, shimmering like a signature. The constellations around it quieted, as though listening. The light gathered, condensed, and formed words, not in speech, but in brightness, written across the whole horizon in the language of stars. Nothing perfect lasts, and that is why it matters. Liv's breath caught. The sentence pulsed once more, then scattered. The stars dissolving back into motion, carrying the message into eternity. She smiled, tears glowing in her eyes. Then let it never last. The wind rose again, lifting her hair like threads of gold, and for one brief instant, every star in the sky beat in unison. Not as command, not as prayer, but as understanding. And when the light of morning finally washed the stars away, their heartbeat remained, quiet, human, unending. The pulse of a universe that had learned to mend itself, not because it was broken, but because it was alive.